This meeting of the Texas Veterans Commission Fund for Assistance Advisory Committee. At this time, I'd like to take a roll call of the committee members. Mr. Ball? Okay. Mr. Dick Archer?
Present.
Mr. Daniel Ball? Mr. Robert Cervantes?
Here.
Mr. Richard Hatfield?
Present.
Mr. Perry Jeffries?
Present.
Mr. Robert O'Reilly?
Present.
Mr. Al Poteet?
Present.
Mrs. Carrie Reyna here. Mr. Charles Wright?
Present.
Okay, so we have 8 members present, and we do have a quorum. And I'd like to ask committee member Mr. Charles Wright to now lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance to the U.S. flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And now I'd like to ask committee member Mr. Al Poteet to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance to the Texas flag.
Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
Thank you, Mr. Wright and Mr. Poteet. At this time, I will open the floor to any members of the public who wish to provide public comment to the advisory committee members on matters under its purview. Anyone who wishes to speak must have submitted a public comment form. Please limit your comments to no more than 5 minutes. Please remember this is time for the advisory committee to consider any public comments, but any discussion or deliberation by the advisory committee for matters not posted on the agenda must be limited to placing the item on the next agenda. Do we have any speakers out there? Okay. So with that, I'd like to now move on to agenda item number 3. Approving the agenda item is the approval of our past meeting minutes. You should have received copies of these minutes via email to review them in advance of the meeting. Are there any correction, or is there a motion to approve the minutes of the March 30th, 2017 FVA Advisory Committee meeting as presented? Is there a motion or any corrections?
Madam Chair, one correction on page 7. It says seconded by Charles Hatfield. It should be Richard Hatfield.
Okay, duly noted. Are there any other, thank you, Mr. Wright. Are there any other corrections? Okay, hearing nothing from the members, is there a motion, or all in favor? Okay. Yeah, first of all, I'm sorry. Procedurally, I was wrong. Is there a motion to approve the minutes with the one correction as stated by Mr. Wright?
I move that we adopt the minutes with the correction.
All right, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, the motion was stated by Mr. Jeffries and seconded by Mr. Charles Wright. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? All right, the motion passes with 8 yeas and no nays. Okay, next on our agenda, we're going to discuss a recommendation that a subcommittee for the Fund for Assistance got together pertaining to the size of individual grant awards. Mr. Hatfield will be making a presentation, and what I'd like to ask the committee members if we could just go ahead and listen to Mr. Hatfield's presentation in full, and then from there we can discuss what we need to discuss and move from there. Are there any questions or comments on that suggestion to my fellow committee members? All right, Mr. Hatfield, please, sir.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair, committee members, and the staff, and anybody in the audience. We had a very interesting time, and believe me or not, if 3 of these members fall asleep while I'm talking, it's because we've talked so much. But I do want to commend their patience and their ability to come forward with some really innovative ideas in different areas. It was really a neat experience, and we have a lot of camaraderie from that. From that, I'd like to go, and of course, these are the 4 members that were on the committee, so let's go to the next slide. We sat down and took a look at what we thought the goal was going to be. And what we're trying to do, and we believe that Texas Veterans Commission, we believe the staff, and we believe this committee, we all have basically the same goal. And that is, of course, to disperse the monies to these nonprofit organizations in a balanced and equitable manner. Now, I would dare say, if I ask each one of you to give me the definition of balanced and equitable, it would be somewhat different. That is the most difficult thing to do, but we still believe it's a goal that we all have in mind, all of us that are involved in any of this. Now, as far as our slide 3, this is kind of the research and the meetings we had. We had a great meeting in Waco at the VA Center of Excellence, and I'd like to thank Robert for his help there. We took a tour of the place, and quite impressive, and if you get the chance to go, I'd recommend you go. Really a neat place to be. Well, anyhow, we went through a lot of different documents, as you can see. They had the one meeting in Waco, and then we had a conference call every Monday morning at 8:30. And I got to tell you, for me, 8:30 was early. Way too early for me. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So we did do our research. The one thing that we knew right up front is that whatever the Texas Veterans Commission puts down as their priorities, and I want to talk about the word priority in a little bit, whatever they put in writing for us to do, that's what we're going to do as a committee. There will be no changes in that. They are the ones to make the decisions, how that goes. But I do want to talk about just the word priority a little bit later. Okay. Good. As we went through this, we put together 5 recommendations from the subcommittee to you all, and then, of course, to go to the Texas Veterans Commission. Now, one of these recommendations, the first one there, the FVA, the applicant's best practice, we can take care of that in-house ourselves. That does not have to go to the Texas Veterans Commission. But the other 4 will have to go to the Texas Veterans Commission to discuss them. But we've got, we'll have a discussion about the best practices and the Rubik scoring rules, go through that, and the red flags, and then the geographic distribution of monies. And then the last one would be when the monies get below $5 million. But I have to tell you, what we all want is for every one of these categories to have over $5 million, so we don't have this problem. But if it does get below $5 million, we'll explain it later why we have a recommendation for it. Now, this is a recommendation from us, and it's the best practices for the applicants. Now, we've all sat in this room before, and some organizations have struggled with this. And they have many people come up and speak and introduce. It takes time. And we don't have that much time. We want to hear, we want to get right down to the substance. And so we're just putting this out with the applicant. We'd like to have it put out with applications so that when they receive this, they take a look at this, they say, oh, wow, they're serious. We put it together on 1 page. And basically what we're saying is, we'd love to have a 1 or 2 page executive summary. Now, we know the way I guess the applicants, the paperwork's put together, that might be a little bit difficult because they try to put everything in different boxes in different categories. But if they could put together a 1 or 2 page executive summary, we think that would help us out a lot. And then also number 2, consider having just 1 individual make that presentation. We know every one of these organizations, they are trying to do things for the veterans. So we don't necessarily need somebody, to come up and be a sworn testimony, because we know that's what, we're just trying to figure out to get the ones that we really feel like should have the money, and in that balanced way. Now, keep that in mind. Okay, now, number 3 there, we went through this, and we want to know what their unique services are. Are they going to take care of critical needs in their area? And that's very important. How about partnerships? In other words, I guess we would kind of look at this as an entire package. Maybe you only take care of one thing, but do you have partnerships to help these individuals in other ways? Like, let's say, homeless. That's great. Do you have any partnerships for them to get transportation to go somewhere? And we need more partnerships with each other, with different of these organizations. Okay, the impact today, what have you all accomplished? Just tell us right up front. Let us know. And sustainability. How are you going to stay in process? I think sometimes we have organizations that may request money that really do not have the ability to sustain it over time. And we want to know if they have sustainability and move from there. And number 4, let's just practice that presentation. They only have 3 minutes. And you guys should have cut me off at 3 minutes. But it's difficult. We have so many applications going through them. And accuracy and statistics, they're the key. And then there's no penalty if you're not there. Okay, next. Okay, can we move that over a little bit?
Richard, we've got copies.
Okay. Now that we start on the B part of this, this is just a review of what goes on today. And we have Texas Veterans Commission previous priorities this last time. This is kind of the way it was put down. And let's talk about priorities. Charlie and I have talked about it. And maybe we need a different word, because in my mind, I'm a math person, and you put priorities to me, and I just sit there and say, okay, that's your first priority. Well, that may not be what the Texas Veterans Commission is thinking about. So we might want to think about that, of trying to define, or at least ask the Texas Veterans Commission, when you put these in a list, is this how you run it? And I'm thinking, probably not. I think there are lots of ways to do this. Okay, the first one, the ones that are red, here's where we have an issue and a concern, is the fact that the way we've had these graded in the past, where the outstanding came in, it's a mathematical calculation in reality, and it has nothing to do with the critical needs of this organization, or what they're trying to do. It has nothing to do with the region they're in or anything. And then we had the following services categories: financial assistant. And here's another one, geographic distribution. We're going to talk about that again in a little bit. And I think what the thought process, all of these are very good. It's just depending on how each individual interprets them. And so we're going to take a look at these 2 issues. Now, that next to the bottom one, encourage the diversity of services, terrific. These are all good recommendations. And then, of course, they've asked us to fully fund each applicant when possible. Okay, so the next slide. I'm not going to go through all of this. This is technical. It's Rubik scoring. I guess the part where we think it's important, because I think this gives the staff a feeling whether or not each of these applicants or organizations, maybe they should be, what do I want to say? If you have a poor scoring, maybe we need to go out and check. Somebody needs to go out and say, okay, is this justified, or what are they doing with their money? But I don't think it has anything to do with our decisions, or at least that's what we came up with. We think the scoring is important for the staff, but not necessarily for us as applicants, as members of the committee. And it's, by the way, this is a complicated part. Charlie, how much time does this take for the staff to do this?
this is a significant amount of time when you talk about the number of applications and having to get it through 3 different folks and go through each one. So we struggle, we get the applications at the beginning of November, and with the holidays, we struggle to make sure that we've got everything processed to get it to you guys by mid-January. So 2 months, 2.5 months.
Well, like I said, I'm a math person, and I knew immediately this took a lot of time. And so I don't know, it depends on the Texas Veterans Commission, if they want to continue that, or the process, or maybe modify it, or whatever. But I would suggest maybe somebody take a look at it. That last one down there, where the applicants can receive an overall rating of outstanding, commendable, satisfactory, below average, and unsatisfactory. It basically, again, this is all numeric scoring, or there's something in that application where they are not acceptable. Now let's go to the next slide. This is just kind of where the Texas Veterans Commission, the priorities that we have. The issue, well, that we had is the fact that the grants are scored by the staff using rubrics. We don't have any issue with the staff at all. What we do is have an issue is the fact that it doesn't give us what we need. Although we could have someone with a satisfactory scoring and have urgent needs. Or you could have someone had an outstanding scoring and it's in areas where, that's not really a high priority for the Veterans Commission. So we're kind of looking at this as a big picture. Number 2, I think I discussed that already. Okay, and the 3 and 4 are very important there about the regions and then the red flag issues. This number 5, I'm going to talk about the red flag issue in a few minutes, but number 5, this is where we're looking at the Texas Veterans Commission on what they recommend to us, and then if they recommend something like critical needs, then we have a responsibility to make sure that we move in that direction. We can't ignore it. That's why that's there, because in our discussing all these issues, we can see where critical needs in certain regions are different than other regions. They just are. Okay. So let's go to slide 10, and this is our recommendation. That when those applicants come to us, we're suggesting no scoring. We just look at them as applicants, organizations. I think the other way to look at this is we're a filter. Staff is a filter. The Texas Veterans Commission is another filter. So the first filter that we look at comes from the staff. And so they've been through this process enough, and if somebody has an application that's unacceptable, I think they have a responsibility to get it out of there. So anyhow, so what we're suggesting is we don't have any scoring for us, and then those last 2 categories, below average and unsatisfactory, if it's legal, let's just screen them out. We don't need to see them. If they're that far down the list, then we don't want to see them. Now, number 3, red flags. Everybody has a different definition of what red flag means. I kind of look at a red flag as a really not a good issue, something we don't want to approve of. And so what we thought about, let's just get rid of the red flags. If it's that serious, then let's let the staff take care of it, and we won't even see the application. But what we do want to see is something like a blue flag inserted, so that when there's an issue maybe with the application, some question mark, but it's not serious enough to not be an application, a good applicant. It's just a matter of not paperwork, but it could be a blue flag for something that there's a question mark in someone's mind, but it's still not serious enough to close them out as an applicant. So those are the 2 and 3 recommendations. Is we'd rather see no scoring, and then just take the red flags out, and then let us know what the issues are with each applicant, if there are any. Okay. Let's go to slide 11. Okay, the TVC geographical distributions, regions. Well, we struggle with this one, and think about it. The issue is the regions, and the way the regions are drawn, we do not have an equal number of veterans in each region. Okay, so now when you go back into you want equal monies if possible, well, what does that mean in there? I think what it means for us as a committee, we're going to have to make some tough decisions in the future. Under here A, this veteran home repair. Well, I think of that. Let's see. Wonder how much it costs to redo a house in Dallas, North Dallas, versus West Texas, or versus East Texas, or maybe Houston. There's such a variation in cost that I think that also needs to be considered by us as a committee to make a decision and say, well, we're trying to distribute this money as well as we can, but we may have to accept some high cost in certain areas. I mean, the costs are just higher there. Okay, and B, we took a look at this last time, and it looked like that North Texas had approximately 24% of the veterans. But of our applications that we approved of, they received about 14% of the money. Well, what we think is that we're not suggesting that you go in there and take each region and say, okay, they have 24%, we're going to give them 24% of the money. We're not suggesting that at all. We're just suggesting that let's keep it more in line of how many veterans are in the region. Plus this, think of this. Houston area has a large number of veterans, a lot of World War II veterans. Well, unfortunately, they're moving on to another life. And so the demographics are going to change. And the committee, I think, needs to kind of take a look and see where the veterans live and make decisions more in line with that. And then C and D, I think I expressed it earlier. Outstanding grant applications, they may not have the critical needed services. And in the past, we have basically always given the outstanding grant applications opinions, the two columns on the left and the 2 million on the two columns on the right. And you can see, you don't have to go any further than the first one to see that it is a disproportionate amount of money for that, 25%. So we looked for a solution for that. And that's under the grant size concept. What we were trying to do was standardize this from what the TVC, the Texas Veterans Commission, had done in the past. Now, we would make a small change here. If you look at that, the grant request to the latest known available funds. Well, hopefully, if we can ever get all these categories over $5 million, we don't ever have to worry about this. But it's probably going to be some time before that actually happens. But let's take a look at that example, all categories. What we did, or suggesting rather, is that we make that $4.5 million and above. And there's several reasons for it, but what we're trying to do is, if they're just slightly below $5 million, let's don't penalize them to a lower level. Let's go ahead and let them have what they normally would get, $500,000, okay? Now this next one, below $4.5 million. What I did at the time, and everybody seemed to accept it, is I took the $5 million and said, well, the grants aren't going to go below $1 million. 5 and 1 is 6, divided by 2 is 3. So that's $300,000. That's where that came from. So if it's below $4.5 million, then let them have 10% of the money, $300,000 if statewide. And then go ahead and use their 6% rule for the rest of the regions. 6% max for each applicant be $180,000. Now, I'll tell you right up front, these numbers are arbitrary, and they're going to be changed again one day. It depends on what happens. What we're trying to do is put something in place that is a little bit more fair today. That's all we were trying to do, and we're not going to ever tell you that this is perfect, because it's not perfect, and we know it. Okay, and then of course, the main thing is, at bottom one reminder is that to fully fund the grants. Okay, let's go to next slide, 18. This is just how it would work. In other words, if they had 5 million, it'd be 500,000 left side, but the 10% rule below the 4.5 million would be that yellow on the right side. And by the way, if you look at that bottom, in the original 5%, what I call a 10% rule, if you look on the left side where it goes all the way down, the minimum amount that the Texas Veterans Commission said was $5,000. So on the under the yellow part, it's 6,000 where the percentages come out. So we did not go below that 5,000 either. Okay, let's see, 19. Okay. We understand that some of these recommendations, it's going to make our job more difficult, but I'll tell you what, the camaraderie that we have and that we welcome the challenge to do this for our veterans, because we believe they owe, if I go back to that one slide, let me find it, a balanced and equitable manner. That's different to everybody, but we have that responsibility. That's what we should be doing. Okay, what I'd like to do now is go back to the recommendations that we have, and the first one is on page 5. I'm sorry. It is page 6. Okay. This is the letter or the guidelines that we would like to put out to each applicant to make their job and our job easier. So, do we have any discussion? Yes, sir.
Have you developed a executive summary sheet at this point?
We have a document that Perry has put together. We don't have it with us, do we?
Well, so I initially I started with just like a one-page letter, which we'd like to issue maybe as part of the RFA packet. It just says these are suggestions, because we understand that the public, when they come here, or the applicants, when they come here, it's their right to speak. They can bring as many people as they want, they can say whatever they want. But to give them hints or the value of our experience, we wanted to issue them off a one-page info sheet that just says, where it says executive summary, what that is addressing is those piles of material that people bring.
Yeah.
So we're going to suggest that instead of bringing extensive handouts that maybe not every member, examines in detail, that they just give us a 1 or 2 page executive summary. So I don't know about you guys, but I do not go through that material. We take some of that material, if it's publicly available, and use it to improve listings on TextVet. But I spend my time with the application, not the handout they give us during presentation day. And I think it's expensive and time consuming. I think what has happened is many of these applicants feel if I don't come there and if I don't give them a snazzy book or handout, that I'm lessening my chances at getting a grant. And I think what we want to communicate is, no, we're going to evaluate your application. We're going to evaluate the service and the need for the service. And so that's what the summary is. We can create an example, but I think most of us know what an executive summary is.
So, Mr. Hatfield, am I correct to assume then that whatever the application process is now, that lengthy process, it's just going to boil down to, this is going to be on top of that?
This is just like a hint. This is just saying, if you want to come, which is your right, here are some hints based on the experience of the members that have heard hundreds of these presentations. So it's just guidelines on their appearance only, should they want to make an appearance.
Okay.
Okay.
Can you, I just have a question on page 6, number 3. A, your unique services, and D, your impact to date. Will those If they don't have unique services, but they're really good and they provide a good service, does that mean it's going to count against them somehow?
No.
Okay.
Not in our opinion. What we looked at this is just, like Perry was saying, it's a recommendation to move the process for them when they come and speak to us to where we get full value out of it. Because we've seen individuals where they've come up and they're wasted time and not knowing who's going to present what part, and we're just saying, well, for yourself, to present it to us somewhat in this way. And no, we're not going to, because that's not a part of it.
Yeah, and, I think we would want to make sure the document says you don't have to do these, but here's some suggestions to get
Sure.
the best use out of our time. I think all of us have seen presenters come here and spend the entire 3 minutes reading somebody's introduction. When you've seen them come up and spend an extensive amount of time quoting those statistics, often incorrect statistics, and then never tell us what they do or why they're applying for the money. And so we're just trying to give them a hint to make the best use of their time. And I think we would definitely want to frame it that way so that it does not become a de facto rule.
Correct.
We would definitely want to prepare the document in a way that says, like, there's no penalty if you don't. There's no penalty if you don't. You can come up and sing us a song if you want, or read us a poem. That might be a really clever thing. But for most people, here's some suggestions for how to get the most impact with the 3 minutes or 5 minutes, whatever it is that you have.
Now, me personally, I'm sure my other colleagues get emails, hey, there's a veteran out there in need for whatever. Me personally, I would like to know from them when they're up there doing their presentation, how fast they can get that help to them. Because 9 times out of 10, when the veteran is going to that organization, they don't see this in their crystal ball coming. So I personally would like to know if they meet the criteria, whatever it may be, how fast they can also get that help out to the veteran, because that just starts another series of snowballs.
I think that's an excellent suggestion, and that can be added so easy, and it would be very informative for all of us. When they come in and say, well, okay, if you're going to do this, what's the timeline? Maybe.
No, I think it would, depending on our decision today, and within the rules, you may need to ask the council or Charlie, that if we agree it's a good idea to distribute this sheet, then the next step is to create the sheet and distribute it, and make sure that we all agree on the items on it. And that's, certainly should be there. And that the legal counsel agrees with the format of it, so that we're not making a de facto rule. So that we wouldn't handle this slide, we would then create the document that we're going to. And what is the right time to distribute it? Is it with the RFA packet? Is it in the morning of the presentations? Is it when they fill out the Eventbrite that says, I want to come and speak? I don't, we didn't really get into that so much as some of the common best practices we thought we agreed on.
So ask this question: Do you have a feeling of what our intent was here? Do you have a feeling of the intent of what we wanted to make for best practices for the applicants? Do you? No?
Me personally, I understand the intent, and I'm assuming my other colleague members on this are along the same lines. Am I correct in that assumption? Mr. Poteet?
I agree. I think it's a good recommendation and be helpful to each of the organizations that are speaking or sending a document that's a cover sheet. I just wanted to make sure that it wouldn't have a chilling impact when somebody's looking at possibly making an application for a grant, that this goes, well, we don't have unique services we provide what veterans need. It's not that unique versus other organizations like ours. Or if it's a newer organization, what's your impact today? I would just hate to have a chilling impact on someone deciding not to apply for an application. That was my own concern. Otherwise, I think it's really good that they summarize and they only have one speaker and they practice and they do all those things. And those are helpful hints.
I'm gonna have to take blame for this being in red. Like I said, anything that's in red, it catches your attention, and actually this should all be in black, but we just did it that way to get your attention on that. And I like your ideas, and here's a recommendation that I think what we could do is, because these are issues that are always difficult to change in organizations like this, because it requires everybody to have to come in for a meeting and so forth. I would suggest if we can agree that we agree on the intent of what this is, then we could give it under the direction of Madam Chair, and make sure we have it in the right way, that it doesn't offend anybody. And we know what we want to do.
So duly noted, Mr. Hatfield. Mr. O'Reilly, since, there were the committee members and we've now heard from me and Mr. Poteet, how are you, your thoughts on this matter?
Well, I agree with all the recommendations that have been noted here and appreciate them. I think the only reservation I may have had was that we approached this as hints and guides, and I expected more direction. That this is the way, you need to follow the summary, or it should be one person making a presentation, that it have more of a direction as opposed to a hint. And to that extent, that's the only where I come back. And yet I'm sensitive to Al's part, because I have some chilling effect here on the whole process. But I was expecting to say this is the way all of them are going to farm it, that they would be more specific.
I don't think we can do that. I think under the law, that they're allowed to say and, do whatever they want. So I think maybe one of the issues in this, it could help with Mr. Poteet's issue too, to absolutely not issue this with the RFA, that maybe it's only issued after they've said they want to come publicly speak or something. So that way it doesn't color their application. We only really want to affect or give them the best chance at a good personal appearance. And, so if this is attached to the RFA packet, it may become a de facto rule. We don't want to do that. I think that would probably be against the state open meetings law. But I believe they had a sign-up procedure last time, people that said they wanted to come and comment. And maybe we hand that sheet out then and just say, here's a way you may want to shape your presentation. So me personally, I've been an advocate for ending some of this in the past, but under the Texas open meeting law, we're not allowed to, and people can make a comment whenever they want. That's, citizens. Is that accurate? Am I accurate with that?
So, Mr. Cato, your comment?
I'm not sure what the question was anymore. I'm sorry. No, if you put this out as you have to follow these steps, what are you going to do? Tell them stop and go away? We couldn't do that. We couldn't do that.
Other agencies actually do not have this process. They have it where the applications come in, and then the staff actually grades them and sorts them out and picks which ones. We have a unique situation here where it's left up to us after the staff filters them, whether or not to accept it or not. So, like Perry said, we're just trying to look at ways to help them out. That's our intent.
Okay, so let me make sure I have this right. So they've submitted the RFA, it's gone through the process. Of course, we haven't discussed which on those processes yet. Excuse me, this would be then a recommendation for them, or just be out on the website? And it would not become a burden on the staff, because I know you are, you know, it's quite labor intensive anyway. And so this would not become part of the labor intensive portion with the staff. They would, any speakers, or they want to submit it after the packet, that this could then become an additional reading material for us?
You know, the way we looked at it,
If, in the spirit of someone that isn't able to show up, that they're still afforded this opportunity if they want to present 1, 2, and 3 in written format to us, correct?
I think they can send a YouTube now, right, or a link, so they don't.
Yes, we can take videos if they want to have somebody just their position, and we'll play the video for them when they're here, so.
This is only hints for people that are making an appearance. It's not, we don't want them to suggest that they need or must or even can submit additional documents. It's not to alter the application process or the scoring or any of that. This is merely saying, should we communicate with people that come to make an appearance so that they make the best use of their time? And when they do that, they make the best use of their time.
Okay, is there any further discussion on this, on this recommendation? Okay, then Charlie or Mr. Cato, I would ask then that I would assume this has to go through council's purview. She's got to take a look at it.
If you guys want to put together a best practices for the application presentation meeting, by all means, if that's what you decide to do, you want to do that, then we'll make sure that it is reviewed by the right people before we publish it on our website.
okay, actually, we're kind of in the details of this also. And this could very easily be made a lot more generic. In other words, we could just say 1 or 2 page summary. We could say, consider having one person, this is a suggestion. And 3, just to express why your organization is different. Leave out those 5 issues right there, and then practice your presentation. You only have 3 minutes, and just remember accuracy and statistics, you know, and they're the key. And that there's no penalty for not appearing. We can make it very generic.
Yes, Mr. Wright.
The one comment I would add to point number 1 would be, or potentially just a reminder, if they're bringing us documents that aren't in the grant application, they probably should have been. So in other words, they've basically already given us a lot of times all that information, or they should have, financials and things like that. Because I've noticed a lot of them bring us financials.
So let me ask you, Mr. Hatfield, I believe you were presenting 5 recommendations. I wonder if we should go ahead and put a motion out on this. Yes, Mr. Archer.
Madam Chair, this is Dick Archer. That's exactly where I was going, is to let this entire body know that we've had a major meeting of the subcommittee in Waco for half a day. We've had 9 conference calls. There's been a lot of thought put into this. We can fine tune it, but I really would like to have everyone know that we felt comfortable that this was just kind of a guidance. And I would like to make a motion that this, as presented, would go forward to the appropriate staff and legal, and that the subcommittee's recommendations be approved.
I would tender to you and ask you on your motion if we're just talking about the best practices, because I do think there were other recommendations.
That's fair enough. Yes, we'll focus right on the best practices.
So if there's any further discussion on the floor within McConnell, then, sir, could you restate your motion, please?
I would like to make a motion that we accept the subcommittee's recommendation of best practices for applicants at this time, as presented.
Is there a second on that motion?
I'll second it.
All right, Mr. Archer made the motion, Mr. Perry's seconded the motion. All in favor?
Madam Chair, may I suggest something? Could you, as part of your motion, make it that this check for grammar and English and so forth? Okay.
I think
That'll be automatic.
procedurally, we can still stay with the motion. So it was seconded by Mr. Jeffries, motion made by Mr. Archer. All in favor? All not in favor? All right, the motion passes.
Thank you.
8 in favor, 0 not. That. Recommendation 1, best practices for applicants.
Okay, if we could go to slide 10.
All right,
This is 2 and 3 recommendations that we have. And I believe we should take each one of them separately. And what this is suggesting is we don't want to do away with the scoring at all. That's the staff's business. The Texas Veterans Commission has that. But what we want to see is the scoring for us not there. We don't want to see the outstanding and all of that. We want to be able to look at each application and make our own judgments, if it's a critical need, or if it's in an area that needs the money, or if it's, where we want the money to go. We felt like the way in the past when we were looking at the scoring part of it, it was mathematical, and we had individuals who really, they may have been below that category of where they didn't get even recognized towards the bottom. And it may be that they may have had critical needs. And so we felt like that we need to look at all of them in a box by themselves. If they're not acceptable, we don't want to see them.
I just would like to add to that a little bit. So what we're really suggesting is that the applications we see be scored on a go, no-go basis. And I understand that the commendable, outstanding, that's very useful to the staff when you have to decide who you're going to check for compliance, right? Through the year, I'm assuming that you have to prioritize who are you going to visit first, who are you going to audit and all that. But for us, the prioritization of outstanding applications, it can be that somebody, if we try to follow that prioritization above the actual needs of the veterans in the area, you can write a really great application for something that is maybe not needed. So, I don't want to sound too informal here, but you can write a perfect application for Hamsters for Heroes, for instance, and yet the food bank application is not very well written, but the food is the more important need. And we think that by removing that prioritization, to show us go or no go, that then we can take the commissioner's priority, not so much on the quality of the application, but on the quality of the service or the need for the service in that area. So if the commissioners would give us a priority like financial assistance or housing or transportation, whatever their priority is, we're happy to follow that, and we will follow that. But in some areas, like he said, they don't have professional grant writers, and it's quite an extensive application. So it's it can be difficult for people to do. So that's what we're asking for go, no-go scoring. And, Colonel Palladino has stopped me a few times and said, well, y'all can consider any application, but there's usually not enough money to go deeper than outstanding and maybe a few of the commendables. So there's well-worthy services and applications that we really don't look at, and areas maybe we don't consider because they're not as well written. So that's basically, the first one is just saying go, no-go scoring. And the second one, and then I'll quit talking so much, is that when we get those spreadsheets, they very helpfully highlight sometimes that like maybe a document is missing or a resume is not there, and they highlight that in red, and that's just a human nature thing that when you see a red flag, you go, whoa, there must be something negative, but possibly it's just a piece of paper that needs to be turned in. And so we're saying instead of using the red color to highlight the Excel spreadsheet cells, use blue or green, some other color that doesn't tell us, subconsciously there's something wrong with this application. We're just trying to make them be more even.
All right.
Good.
I appreciate those comments.
Quick question, I just want to make sure I understand what we're talking about here. We're talking about the staff scoring, where we get the different levels and the 3 different staff people doing all the research, interviews, all that. That's what we're talking about here. That would not be included in,
It's the scoring part that's, well, they're put into categories. They have the outstanding and on down to
Right.
not acceptable. And what we're saying is, they can do that, the staff can go ahead and do that for themselves. If they have to need to go say, hey, we got a compliance issue, let's go take a look. All we want the applications that are acceptable for us to evaluate. That's all we're trying to say.
so in other words, we wouldn't have a summary from the 3 staff and the average that comes up with some sort of numerical evaluation that, in my opinion, is kind of fair to everybody because it's standardized. And we wouldn't use that information?
Well, here's the issue we see with that the scoring that's done mathematically, and I've used it myself in the past, but it actually doesn't give, in our opinion, what we would consider the priorities that are needed in certain areas. In other words, I think Perry said it earlier, that if you can have someone that's not a good grant writer, but they've got the program that fits right in with what the Texas Veterans Commission wants us to be giving money to. In other words, that scoring is only for the application, has nothing to do with what they're doing as an organization. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I just want to make an observation. I
Okay.
gotta tell you, when I first came in the FVA, it was very helpful to have those kinds of scores. And to this day, I find it extremely helpful to have other people's numerical assessments in there. And I've noticed that most of the time, when I go back and look at all the data, usually the numbers are pretty close. Every once in a while, there's a discrepancy in one of the 3 staffers' interpretation. I would suggest that that could be problematic for us because we could all interpret things a lot differently, and I think it'll compound our work. I've got an issue because I think almost everybody that's here at one time or another has complimented the staff on all the research and all the hard work they've done. I gotta tell you, I don't need another full-time job, and I really like having that kind of research work done. It doesn't impact on my decision necessarily, but it gives me more data points and it gives me time to go back and look at some of the other material that's provided. So I have some serious issues on the no scoring because the scoring is not mandatory, and it doesn't mean that my vote is impacted one way or the other. I just want to make one other comment about the geographical distribution. I understand that rationale, and I understand the Texas Veterans Commission's point in spreading it around, and that's always been a priority. Everyone has always told us from my first day, that was an important priority to try and factor it in. But it seems to me, if you've got a dearth of organizations in a certain region, and they're mediocre at best, and you're overlooking other organizations that provide a really, really necessary service to a lot of people, I think that could be problematic.
Mr. Jeffries?
I think that, I don't think we're suggesting that the staff doesn't score them and that we're not even provided their comments. But we want to remove the outstanding and commendable and those ratings. And we would like that the commissioners not prioritize outstanding applications because it brings up the situation you just mentioned, that we just see the go, no go, that we see every legal application. I appreciate the staff comments very much. They highlight things that are missing or that are incorrect or organizations that are troubled or that only have single sources of funding. I think all that information is very helpful. But when we're told just do the outstanding first, and that's been an issue before where we've said this is a really necessary service, but they only get a satisfactory rating. Here's a less necessary service, but they're outstanding.
You know, and we've discussed among ourselves on this board, who should we choose, so.
But I think that's why
Mr.
we're making
Potteet.
those tough decisions. I mean,
Right.
those are the calls we're supposed to work on as a group and wrestle them to the ground and work it out. Let me ask a question. Does that mean when I go through an application, I won't see the numerical score?
I think you can still see that. I would
Well,
just,
then why wouldn't we, I mean, it's reality, the score is the score, it's an average score. I mean, I'm just gonna have to sit down there and do that myself, instead of having the staff come up with those ratings. And quite frankly, a couple times, I've seen some mediocre organizations that I thought were graded a little low, but I defer to the judgment of the staff, because they did the interviews and all the legwork. So I think that's critically important. And I think if we establish a rule that's going to make it more difficult for us to do our jobs, I have a real problem with that, unless somebody convinced me this is a really good idea. I'm semi-opposed to it.
No, I understand.
Because it's really important that we get all the information and not have to guess or add extra work on ourselves, that I could be looking at the application in more detail.
Okay, Chuck has something he wants to say.
So, gentlemen, may I please recognize the members to speak? So in fairness, we're not talking over, everyone has valuable contributions. Mr. Wright.
And to your exact point, I think we do understand that. And as Mr. Jeffries has said, we can leave the scoring in there, but I'll point out two things. One, in the past, commissioners have actually stated in writing we have a priority to outstanding grants, and it has pushed us to follow their lead, and we're going to do that. And I think you have this trickle-down effect. But the second thing I'll say is, you made the remark, you may have a mediocre grant application. That does not mean you have a mediocre organization, and there's one specifically in my mind that is providing, and I actually told them this after we were able to talk about, after everything had been announced, I said, you guys got up there and you didn't tell us that you're the only service being provided, in this case it was a homeless service, that was dealing with not only veterans, and they had a unique floor built for veterans, but had a segregated space for families and for female veterans, which is a real problem in that particular geographic area. And yeah, it's in fact Dallas, but that's really irrelevant, because you can have that in any city. I mean, that's not going to be unique to Dallas per se, but they just didn't write a very good grant. And so they had a satisfactory score, and then they had the red flag, which was more of an administrative issue. But I mean, it was a very valid issue. You know, you absolutely cannot make faith-based part of your program. So we absolutely have to have that note in there, and they have to know that as well. But again, between those two, nobody wanted to vote for them, even though that was the only homeless service in 50, 60 miles.
So, yes, Mr. Hatfield.
Let's take a look at this maybe in a little different way. We're looking at this as, we're looking at the organization's, the quality of the organization. That scoring doesn't tell you one thing about the quality of the organization. It just tells you that how did they do with their sheet, filling out the application, this, that, and the other. Has nothing to do with the quality. And I guess we kind of look at it this way, is that the staff has responsibility. Like I said, we've got 3 filters to go through. And the staff has responsibility to say whether or not this is a go, no go, as Perry says, or it's acceptable or not acceptable. If it's not acceptable, we don't think we should see it. But we do believe that we need to get into the quality of the organization in our part of the job. That's what we're trying to do.
Yes, Mr. Potteet.
Why is there an assumption that we're not already looking at the quality? I don't see where that changes anything because we don't do the scoring. The scoring's a reality. It's there. The numbers are there, and I'm a little nervous that we're gonna make this a lot harder on ourselves, and potentially, I would think that you open yourself up for some potential conflict of interest issues. If you go down this route and say, you know, you can't use the staff's work. I mean, the staff work has been amazing, and we've all said it over and over and over again. They're still gonna do that work. And I don't know, by looking at an application that somebody sends, or the finished product, or the executive summary, I don't know how I divine quality from maybe not so much quality. I don't know how I do that. Am I getting the true story? Am I getting all the data? If they're doing all the things that are on the Rubik staffing scoring, then I'm pretty sure that they're doing a pretty good job. There's not a red flag in that regard. If they can't do their financials right, and that's indicated, it's a red flag, and it's like, well, then I'm a little nervous about voting for giving anybody any money if they can't get their financials right. So I'm just a little concerned that we're going a little too far over the other way, because the staff does a lot of good work, and they're doing aren't they doing interviews? Aren't they interviewing some of these organizations or having discussions?
No, we don't do any interviews, no. Our scoring rubric is published at the same time as the request for applications, so the applicants can see how we're going to score it, but we don't interview them.
I just don't understand how we define increased quality versus decreased quality by what we're looking at. We're all looking at the same thing, evidently.
So, yes, Mr. Hatfield.
I think this goes into the area of like the red flags. With the scoring that we've had in the past, and if you go down through that list, there are 9 of us, but if 7 of us go by the scoring part of it, we will definitely be biased on the scoring part of it when we get down to giving the money out. We're not looking at this, I guess, to me, it's still the quality of the organization. If they get through the staff, then we need to take a look at them. And it very well may be that we have an organization that's in South Texas, and they get completely left out, just simply because their scoring is not high enough. And that was our thinking. And we're not looking at it to, I guess the way we're looking at it is more or less, let's keep the mathematics out of it. It's either it's acceptable or it's not acceptable. That's how we were looking.
Yes, Mr. Wright.
And I'm going to tangent just slightly. This recommendation is also in a part of the recommendation for the 10% rule. And the idea is that we don't have, and that was another thing, that we did have an outstanding grant last time. I can't remember which one it was. It's not really important, but that gobbled up 20% of the money in one big block from that category. So by implementing the 10% rule, some of these problems are basically going to solve themselves. We'll have smaller amounts of money going to more organizations. So some of this is going to work out in that sense. Did you follow what I said?
Nope.
I was afraid I wasn't saying that very clearly. Perry B might be able to say that better for me.
Mr. Jeffries.
I just, and it may be that we don't all agree on this. I would just say that, as I understand it, the scores that we are giving are given are on the quality of the application, not the quality and need of the service or the organization. And so we're wanting to remove that piece. An alternate way of doing it would be to ask the commissioners to not prioritize outstanding applications, because the last 2 or 3 grant cycles, the #1 priority given to us has been on outstanding applications. And if in that manner, we can basically remove ourselves, because when there's more outstanding applications than there are money to give out, you can just take the top 10 stack and say, here you go, without regard for where they're at or what service they offer. And so, you know, that's what we were trying to get to with the go, no-go scoring, is that we, as a recommendation committee, our recommendation's not binding by law, but we're trying to advise the people who do make that legally binding decision. We think this is a necessary service by a worthy organization in an area of the state that needs it. And we are like an interface in between the mechanical part of the application. Who can fill in all the blocks best? Who's got the prettiest audit? Who's got the nicest resumes? And who's got the most necessary service? And that's really all that was about, so.
Yes, Mr. Jeffers?
Just a quick question to the chair of the subcommittee. I'm a little confused how the information that's going to be made available to us, if it's the same as it was in the past, how am I divining the quality of one organization against another? By what's written in their application? How would I know if that's accurate and if that quality is somehow better than the next one? And part two is, if you're still going to have the staff do the work and they're still going to assign a number, I mean, a number is a number, and it corresponds to, if you put it in a hierarchy like I would do, then the high number is the high number for whatever reason. And then maybe the third item that we need to think about is, yeah, if there are two organizations that ask for $300,000 and that puts it, that's where this group comes in to negotiate and talk and to kick it around and discuss it and then come up with an according number. Otherwise, I don't understand how this helps our decision-making process or adds quality to the decisions we make. Because you need to tell me how this is going to improve the quality of our decisions. I understand we want more quality, but how do I get it with the same information? It just seems like we're going to great lengths to say, well, the staff did all the work and there's a number, but we can't call that outstanding or commendable.
Yes, Mr. Hatfield.
Okay, let's go at it two different ways. Because basically that's a mathematical number. And everybody, or at least I know I have in the past, has used that to help me make my judgments. In reality, I wasn't checking out the quality of the applicant as much as I should have. Now, there's another side to this that we haven't discussed yet. We usually, at each time after we get through, we're asked to say, what's your number one priority in this, like mental health? In other words, and then the staff ranks them that way, and then that's usually how we end up picking, because we have the ones that, let's say all 9 of us agree, then that's going to be at the top, okay? And then we go ahead and go through the process and we vote on it. That's what we've normally done, because if all 9 of us agree on these 3 organizations, they're going to be approved. And what we're suggesting is that some of these organizations, it could be all 9 of us pick one that is in another category today, like satisfactory. That's one way we're taking a look at it. But there will still be I assume there'll still be the ranking of where we pick which one we want, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You know how we, in other words,
We've not made any changes to
Yeah.
that. The way you provide our recommendation, your recommendation individually to us works, and we're not looking to change that unless you want it changed.
No, we're not asking that. Well, I guess I just look at it as more that we're looking at the quality of the applicant rather than the number part.
Yes, Mr. Archer.
There's always two sides to the pancake. The committee has put a lot of work into this. We're enthused, we're energized, but I'd like to pass it on to Charlie, the other side of the pancake. How do you I know that you've had some opportunities to visit with Richard. In all honesty, Charlie, how do you feel about this? Is there something that is helpful? Is there something that's, are you concerned about it at all? I'd like, there's two sides. I'd like Charlie's opinion.
He did say in all honesty.
Yeah.
I got it.
You want to take a break?
Mr. Archer, thank you.
You're welcome.
It is not my place to influence this committee or your deliberations. And I'm sorry, but as much as you know I'd love to comment, it's not my place.
Mr. Cato will be filing for public office next December.
That's why he's making the big bucks.
Before I make my comments, Mr. O'Reilly, I'd like to hear your comments, sir.
Well, there may be there could be a compromise in the sense that we're talking about the first cut being a go and no-go. And couldn't the numbers come in to the go category that we're retaining, and that we can use that as a reference? In other words, we don't need to see the below average applications. So they don't make the cut. And so we're dealing with that go and no-go comment that's been made several times here. And then wouldn't that allow us to apply or use the staff's recommendations on that category or not?
Sure, you could, but it still gets down to, it's all mathematical, and it has nothing to do with the organization itself.
But I think it's a compromise for what we're talking about here that allows us another review, another option, and helps us make those judgments. And so it's just as opposed to not having it available at all to us.
Okay, let me ask you this, that we can certainly, if you're gonna put that together as a motion, we could certainly see how it works out. In other words, it could be compromised to say that. In other words, we still have the computation after the go, no-go, after everybody's gone, but they won't be ranked as outstanding and satisfactory and so forth, correct? Is that what you're suggesting?
We're not at a motion point because I haven't given you my feelings yet, so we're still negotiating or chatting about this. Yes, Mr. O'Reilly. No, okay, go ahead. Are you done, Mr. O'Reilly? Yes, Mr. O'Reilly.
First, thank you. This was exactly where I was going before, was to get these two gentlemen's input, because they've been rather quiet. But I think it's an excellent point, and the only point that I wanted to make is, and I think there's a little bit of confusion, and I want to clarify this. Our goal is not to take away that numerical scoring. So if you lean as part of there are 9 of us, we are each going to grade individually. We're not even allowed to talk. It's very difficult to do for some of us, but we don't, and we adhere to the rules. That scoring should in fact be provided, because it's going to come into play as we individually, it's one of those factors. How you do that as an individual, and I completely agree with the point that you made, how you decide to rank your grant requests is completely your business. If you want to use those scores, by all means. So we don't want to take anything away. What we want to do is we want to take away the prioritizing outstanding grants, so that there's a little bit less adherence to well-crafted grants as opposed to well-crafted organizations. Because right now, as I understand it, we are working with really well-scored grant applications and nothing more.
So
The only thing that I wanted to add is that the intent is not to take anything away from anybody's ability to judge their individual block.
So let me ask Mr. Cato, make sure I've got this straight before I make my comments. Outstanding, commendable, satisfactory, below average, and unsat, it's because they've hit different benchmarks within the application, correct?
Yes. I don't have one of the rubrics in front of me right now, but it's divided up. 10% is the number for, did you fill it out right? Did you answer the questions? Yeah. And then we break it out from there, it's a score on their project. You're correct, we don't really make it a value judgment on whether it's a priority or not, but did they explain it? Can we understand what it is they want to do? That's a portion of the score. Another portion of the score is based on what they provided. How is their organization? Do their resumes indicate that their management has experience? Do they have partnerships? Do they do that piece of it? And then, Irv, remind me, what's the last one? Management. Oh, was it budget? It was budget. Yeah, it was the budget piece of it. Is the budget actually well well-defined? Can I tell by looking at that application exactly how they're going to spend the money and how they came up with it? So that's where our system is, that's what our rubric is, and we tell them that up front.
So in the spirit of that, thank you for making sure my brain housing group was correct in that. You know, gentlemen, first of all, Mr. Archer, Mr. Hatfield, Mr. Jeffries, and Mr. Wright, sincerely, meeting 10 times. We're all prior service military. We know the hours it takes to put together a slide deck. And not to include all the hours you gentlemen have sat and thoughtfully went through this, this whole process, okay? But me personally, when I read these applications, I see, you know, the outstanding through the unsat. But if you were to look at my metrics when I get scoring, you'll see those kind of lone wolf numbers at the end, and 9 times out of 10, gentlemen, it's me, because I've read the application and I just don't go, outstanding, you're on your way. Because I have fought many of the battle here passionately with y'all on trying to get a vote, and some I've been successful, some I haven't, and that's okay. But at the end of the day, in appreciation of everything that you gentlemen have gone through, I still look at that scoring to maybe not, like I said, go outstanding, that's it, you're getting them, and then satisfactory. Because I think in this last session, when we were awarding money, there were a couple times we went way below the line because one or two of us or all of us felt passionately about an organization. So with that said, the other thing that I have concern about is, you know, we've gone through this debate, and we don't even know if we're legal within that. And that, I kind of wish the special counsel was here for her to give her advice to us on that. And then we're talking about, as we further negotiate or discussing, that, well, okay, later on we'll look at the numbers again. Well, I think then, to me, that comes down to how well you've read the package, and I'm not pointing the finger or wagging the finger at anyone, but then it really comes down to how well we've read the package, how well we've listened to and asked the appropriate questions to the speaker up there. And honestly, me, if you notice, that's when they start bringing a veteran, you know, I kind of really want to hear from them. Yeah, they come up with their statutory 2.5 minutes of introducing themselves, but really, to me, it comes down to that guy that they brought back. And I think one had already gone back and sat down, and I brought him back up. And it made a difference to me. So that's all I'll say, that I sincerely appreciate everything, but I'm more into looking at the numbers because it gives me a guide. And Mr. Cervantes, you've been very quiet over there, so I'm going to ask your opinion next, or I'd like to hear what you have to say. Yes, Mr. Hatfield.
Go ahead.
Oh, I thought maybe you had some question. Go ahead, Mr. Cervantes, please.
Good morning. You know, I want to say that for Mr. Poteet, you're not alone. I certainly rely on the staff's judgment. I mean, this is their full-time job. It's not mine. I appreciate every little bit of information I can get. What I think the subcommittee is trying to do is they want to be able, correct me if I'm wrong, by doing go or no go, you guys just want to be able to look at more applications. But you can already do that. It doesn't matter what you vote for, or you know what your number is. Like Chairwoman said, there's going to be outliers. Okay, that doesn't stop me from already doing what I'm doing. Yep.
Okay, I think we're getting the message. And I think Mr. O'Reilly probably has a good compromise, and see if this won't work. let's suggest, could we keep the scoring and have the scoring in there after they're either acceptable or not acceptable, but not have the outstanding, commendable, satisfactory? Not put anything in there, but you still have scoring, and you can look at the numbers.
So before we go further, and I hear you, but I want to ask the question, does that still, because correct me if I'm wrong, when we do show up and we're starting to get ready to deliberate on award money, correct me if I'm wrong, or we're listening to people, that someone that had a red flag was able to turn it into an acceptable or below the average. Are we still allowing for that?
If it's a red flag, typically it's something that has to be corrected. If you select them, then it's something that we correct and they're accepted by the TVC, then we correct that in negotiations. It's usually a red flag is something that is either an unallowable cost or something that has to get changed in the application.
Okay. And then, Mr. Cato, you spoke off about that you had a comment about the legal.
Somebody had a question about legal. What UGMs and CFRs require us to do is publish something that says how we evaluate the applications. The rubric system is what we've been using to do that. We can change what we publish, how we evaluate the system, and we meet that requirement. So it just has to be able to meet the requirement of how we do the evaluations. And that really it's intended to help the applicants know how they're being evaluated.
Yeah, my only concern about that all is that on a go, no-go system, we're leaving ourselves to a lot of the public coming up and going, I don't understand your scoring system. And that's what I'm kind of worried about. Yes, Mr. Poteet.
Not to beat that horse, but if Charlie or one of the staff members could give us just a real quick and dirty summary and kind of a reminder of the kinds of questions, general and specific, that are asked in the staff rubric, that would really be helpful, because to assume those numbers are just quantitative, that there's no qualitative value to it, is short-sighted in that it's helping the members and it also helps the applicants understand what the requirements are. If you're just not doing a good job with the finances, or you don't have the staff, et cetera, you're not in the right region, then you get a little different score. So I'm not going to suggest that those scores are all quantitative. They are an attempt, I think, to quantify some of the quality issues, and it's done by 3 people to get an average, so it's pretty straightforward. I was just hoping maybe somebody could give us a quick summary on the detail and the depth of the questions that were asked. That would be helpful, I think, for me.
Madam Chair, maybe we put up slide 8 back up, and then let someone from the staff talk about the scoring.
Sure, I'm okay with that. Mr. Cato, are you prepared? All right, one moment. Is that the correct slide you want up, Mr. Heffa? All right, Mr. Cato?
Okay, I just opened up the evaluation rubric that we published with the general assistance grants for the last cycle. So the first portion is application, and it's 10%. There are 7 questions. Were the descriptions complete and information and details provided in part 1? Were the descriptions complete, information and details in part 2? And there's subtext under all this. I hesitate to read everything, but all it goes through each one. Did the applicant follow directions consistently in completing the application? Does the proposed project align with the purpose and objectives of the FVA grant program as outlined in the RFA and the TAC? Are the budget tables and narratives calculated correctly? Does the total in Table K match the amount requested? So that's just the 10% strictly on application. The next one is proposed project, and that's 35%. Is the proposed project thoroughly described? Is the service delivery thoroughly described? Is the need or problem thoroughly described to substantiate the proposed project? Are the goals and objectives of the proposed project thoroughly described? Are the beneficiaries thoroughly described? Is the estimated number of clients reasonable for the proposed project? Are the anticipated outcomes of the proposed project reasonable and achievable? Are the identified partnerships appropriate? Is the marketing outreach plan clearly described to ensure connection, engagement with veterans and families, resulting in providing services? Is the proposed project sustainable outside of FVA funding? And again, that's the proposed project portion. That's 35% of our score. The next section is management, and that's 30% of the score. Are the identified principal participants appropriate? Does the organization have experience in providing the services programs to the proposed project, similar to the proposed project? Does the organization currently serve veterans as part of services programs they currently provide? Is the organizational structure appropriate to the type of organization? Has the organization had a successfully implemented FVA-funded project in the past? Does the organization have experience in managing and implementing grant-funded projects? Does the organization have sound fiscal management? Does the organization have a solid method of documenting performance? So again, those questions were management, that's 30%. And then the last portion is budget, and it's 25%. Is the salaries and wages category complete? And these are all pretty much, are they complete? And it goes through the budget tables. The sub questions are the roles, responsibilities, qualifications of positions listed in the table included? Is it a necessity of each position included in the narrative? Is a description provided to directly link the position to the project? That's kind of what all of the budget is, does it link to, but it goes through salaries and wages complete, fringe benefits category complete, travel complete, supplies complete, client services category complete, other category complete, and indirect costs complete. And when you look at if you read the questions in the budget, there's a lot of requirements they have to complete that budget portion, and that's what that's going. So again, that's the budget, that's the final portion, that's 25%.
Thank you, Mr. Cato. Sorry about that.
Can we go back to slide 10, please?
So if there are no further comments from the floor after just hearing the scoring process and looking at Mr. and his subcommittee slides 8 and 10, yes, Mr. Cervantes.
So when we make our motion, or when a motion is made, the recommendation for number 2 should read that our committee recommends that the commission remove the categories as a priority. Right? Am I understanding that correctly?
I think that would be great. That would accomplish my personal desire, not necessarily the work of the committee, but that if the commissioners simply did not say prioritize based on quality of application, if they instead gave us a priority based on the needs of the services, I think that would accomplish the same basic goal.
I just wanted that clarification as it worded, as I just worded it. I would not agree to that. I just don't think a case has been made.
Yes, Mr. Poteet. I do see you, Mr. Wright. You'll be next, sir.
I'm biting at the bit here. That page there says applications to the FVA committee should be provided with no scoring. and we had a discussion earlier that there would be scoring. I think the motion or that you're trying to make is there wouldn't be divided into groups, but that says no scoring. Does that mean that the staff work, that's the scoring, that it would not be present in what we see?
The way I understood it is we'd have the scoring, but the category would not be labeled outstanding, satisfactory, below average. Is that correct? Is that the way you were leaning towards, Mr. Cervantes? No? You want to see it, all those?
I do.
All right.
That is exactly the point that I was going to make. That's my fault, that's my edit. It was not intended to take out the mathematical scoring. That should be no categories. Yeah. So blame me for that, that's poorly worded.
That's okay.
No, but that was, it is exactly my point, and I'm the one who's causing the confusion.
It's just a clarification.
No, but it's a very good point.
So we're entertaining, well, I'm the chairman, I cannot entertain a motion. So would, yes, Mr. Hepburn?
I think we're moving towards a compromise on this, and what we need is somebody to make a motion that basically says that the FVA committee would not be provided with any of those categories.
Right, I need to wordsmith this out, and that's what we're trying to go. So, Mr. Wright?
I wanted to make the motion that we.
No, let's just craft it right now. Let's agree on the wording first.
That basically the motion be that we have satisfactory and below average as our only two grades. I don't think we can actually legally leave anybody just out. I don't think we can just not consider a grant if it's been posted. That's why the question, if legal. But one solution to that would be, and to leave the mathematical scoring in, but that our grant categories be satisfactory and below average.
Mr. Poteet, do you have some feedback on what a crafted motion would be on this? It's a motion too, sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted some clarification because we had said there would be scoring, there was no, so I appreciate the clarification. Although it, just to my way of thinking, when I'm going to sit down and look at the matrix and then I'm going to look at the ranking, all we're doing is we're actually just removing and generalizing the quality and the quantity of the numbers that we're going to consider. What I'd like to suggest is that you're not really changing anything. You're still going to show the scores. You're just opening it up and making it easier to give money to a less quality, in my opinion, or quantitative set of numbers, when that should be our judgment call. I haven't had any issues looking at that category, commendable on up or satisfactory, and I think this group has in the past actually voted to give money to a satisfactory organization. So it's not like we don't do that and it's automatic, and a lot of judgment goes into it. I'm just trying to suggest that for my money, you're just avoiding the reality of what the numbers are, and you're going to authorize the group to look at and maybe give a little more emphasis to lower ranked groups. And if we all agree that the staff does a good job in the 30 some odd questions I think that they ask, which some are very detailed, if we're going to pay attention to that, then we need to pay attention. That should be the priority for my money. And I'm just opposed to removing what we have. I think it's a good system, and unless the commissioners think that we shouldn't do it that way, then I would vote no on changing the scoring we currently have.
So I think we all agree as a committee, we're not going to, that the scoring does does play a very significant part, and after Mr. Cato went back through it, to my mind, I can see where 30% here, 35% here. But I do think that that gives us, gives me more leeway when I'm reading packages, that if I just see satisfactory or I see below average, then that opens up a wider universe of veterans to service. But certainly, I'll be the first one to admit, I'm looking down there at the below average and trying to pull out what should be the best for that region. So I would like to go over to my two colleagues, Mr. O'Reilly and Mr. Cervantes. Mr. O'Reilly, do you have a suggested motion, a crafted motion right now?
No, I really don't. But it seems to me if the motion and maybe it's not a motion, maybe this is a separate consideration, but that we go back to we ask the commissioners not to prioritize outstanding, it seems to, and yet we retain the ratings, and I think we get to the same place. We accomplish what we're trying to do here.
So the way I understand what you just said, let's take out outstanding. And then the highest one would be commendable.
It seems to me that we can retain those ratings, but rather where we've got a directive to focus on outstanding, and if that directive wasn't there, then in that sense, it's a broader category, and we still retain the judgment as to, I think it broadens it in that regard.
All right. Mr. Cervantes.
I think that the motion should be pretty simple. That we recommend that the commission remove that priority from outstanding. I'm not saying whether or not I'm going to go along with it, but that seems to be what we want to happen, without all the caveats.
All right, so,
Something really clean.
Quick question, if I may?
yes, Mr.
What
President.
would be the justification for that? I mean, what would be our justification for asking the commission to do that?
No, that's just, I'm not saying I'm gonna vote for it like that, but I think based on what we've heard today, that's what it boils down to.
Right.
It's
But
the motion
Right.
that we're about to make.
What would the justification for that motion be? I'm just trying to understand.
Go ahead, Mr. Hatfield.
Part of the issue
Mr. Jeffries.
is going back to the original part being balanced and fair and all of this. When the commissioners put down, would you go to slide 7, please? When they put down their priorities, what does that mean? I'd almost like to say, well, these are all the things we want considered. Are they equal or are they numbered? These are not numbered. They don't number them. And so that is another part of our problem with all of this, is because what we have is outstanding grant applications first. And we're suggesting, or my thinking process is, that maybe what we should have is more or less we want guidance in these areas, but not to be numbered. In our own minds, we probably number them. They probably don't read it that way. I don't know for sure. But you see, that's part of the issue, is actually defining what priorities mean.
Go ahead, Mr. Cato.
I just want to put something out here. I have the RFA for general assistances just went out. The priorities are published here. The Texas Veterans Commission established the following priorities to provide guidance to the FVA Advisory Committee in developing funding recommendations for the Commission and making grant awards. These priorities are, no numbers, first bullet, service categories. Priority will be given to the following service categories: financial assistance, supportive services. Second bullet, geographic distribution. The FVA Advisory Committee will develop recommendations that will ensure widespread distribution of grants across the state. Third bullet, diversity of services in geographic areas. The commission encourages a diversity of services provided within geographic regions. Fourth bullet, outstanding grant applications. Priority will be given to outstanding rated grant applications. Fifth bullet, full funding. The FVA Advisory Committee will recommend fully funding grant requests whenever possible. The above priorities will be used in funding recommendations made for this grant. So that's the order. There is
That's it.
Yes, Mr. Jeffries.
So bullet number, I'm sorry.
That's good. That is different than it has historically been. In the last 3 or 4 cycles, outstanding was the first part.
no. I'm reading you from the last cycle, and it was that way the previous cycle as well.
Maybe it just wasn't presented, I think that was.
That's why I wanted to make sure you understood. There's not a number associated with any of these.
To that, to that end, that is accomplished goal, but we have had at least one discussion, significant discussion, about choosing grant applications where some members did not want to recommend a grant application because it was not an outstanding application. So, but as long as that is not the top priority, and we can see all the grant applications, it's less than an issue.
Yes, Mr. Poteet.
Just want one clarification. Bullet number 4 was priority will be given to outstanding.
There are no members. It's just a bullet.
It just says priority.
Yeah, it's the outstanding grant applications bullet says priority will be given to outstanding rated grant applications.
So why wouldn't we get the scores ranked as outstanding or not? I guess the thrust of this whole discussion is, we'll all decide what's outstanding, or based on the scores, the way it's been done here before?
Yes, Mr. Hatfield.
The way it's been done in the past, it would be, the scoring would be, and they put it in categories, there's 5 categories, and you have outstanding as one of them. I was sitting here thinking, maybe what we really need is to maybe put a motion in to ask the Texas Veterans Commission to clarify what they mean by priorities. And this is not necessarily numbered. I could probably live with that.
Well, why don't we do it this way, gentlemen? Why don't we just go ahead and ask them to strike or revise priority be given to outstanding rated grant applications, and say that all applications satisfactory and above will be given priority. Then that way you've got a cut line and they all get priority. You see the numerical scoring, we've all read them, we've heard presentations, and then that way, in my mind, I feel very comfortable that we're given equal footing to all veterans groups within those categories.
Can I second that motion?
Mr. Poteet.
I find that fascinating, and who establishes the line, what's satisfactory?
It will be according to that guidance that Mr. Cato read. Then there's satisfactory. If they make that cut, then from there up, it's satisfactory. Then you read the numerical, then if you are someone that reads those numerical numbers, statistical numbers, fine with me.
Who sets the satisfactory level? How does that?
Oh, you're looking for the number like it's 75% or something? Is that what you're looking for? Mr. Cato?
It's okay to do that, but we wouldn't do it, we wouldn't set a standard for commendable.
The staff sets that.
Outstanding.
The staff sets that.
Yeah.
That's where it comes from. And it's very much like you would see numerical grades, A, B, C, D kind of thing. Off the top of my head, I can't remember what it is, but it's somewhere, outstanding is usually 90 or 95, then 80, 70, 60.
So should I look at this like it's a pass-fail kind of thing? I mean, I don't know how that works with the one bullet that you read about priority to be given to outstanding. I don't know what an outstanding is. I mean, we've had a format heretofore what outstanding was, and now we're gonna change it, the recommendation is to change it. And I don't understand how that's gonna work for the commissioners. It seems like they ought to be telling us that they changed that bullet priority.
Right, and we're going back to them and asking for that change. That's all we're doing here.
And
The way I understand our discussion here, that we're essentially asking them to strike, the priority will be given to outstanding rated grant applications, because as we filter in that some people are good grant writers, some are professional, and some aren't. And then that way, you're allowing for a wider area to be looked at fairly. All right, yes, Mr. Hatfield.
I believe, did you put the motion on the floor?
Well, I can't put the motion on the floor. Somebody has to put it on and then put it out there. Do I have, I think we've talked about a couple of different ways of putting this motion together. Do I have someone out there that would like to put a motion on the floor? Yes, Mr. Yes, Mr. Cervantes.
These are actually.
Go for it.
Okay, number B is.
What slide, please?
10.
Okay.
Has 2 items, but we're only talking about a motion for 1. Are we discounting that second one? 'Cause personally, I would vote for rainbow color. It doesn't matter to me. Is that really, I mean,
Well, I think we're just talking about things here, red flags eliminated. I think we should see that cut line, because then that would be below average, right? It would be satisfactory and above, and below average and below, correct? Yes? Yes, Mr. Jeffries.
Maybe I'm wrong, I want to check the other committee members, but I think that what we're talking about right now, the motion that should go to the floor would address slide 10, the 2, that number 3 is a separate issue, and it's just about the preparation of the Excel spreadsheet documents.
Okay.
It's not, so we were given a list of red flag grants, people that had trouble with compliance in the past. I think that could continue. What we're talking about is when we're given those materials that analyze the grant, sometimes people, they requested a stable door when they are only able to request porch or something, and the team is gonna work with that. Instead of highlighting that in red on the spreadsheet, we just highlight it in color so that human nature doesn't say those guys are bad. That's what number 3 on that slide is addressing.
That's number 3.
Yes, Mr. Cervantes.
okay, since we voted for the first recommendation as a package, and now we're not, I just wanted that clarification that we're splitting those 2 up on,
Yeah,
not just gonna vote.
Well, let's go ahead and split that for ease. All right, yes, Mr. Wright.
I would like to make a motion
All right, Mr. Wright.
from the committee to the Texas Veterans Commissioners to change the priority for funding from outstanding grants to any satisfactory and above grant to include numeric scoring.
I don't really think we need to talk about the numeric scoring, because let's just go with, yes?
You made a motion.
Oh, yeah, okay. So, restate your motion.
That the FVA recommends to the TVC commissioners to change priority for funding from outstanding grants to satisfactory and above grants, period.
All right.
Second that motion.
All right, so Mr. Wright made the motion. Mr. Jeffries seconded the motion. All in favor? Okay, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 yays. All not in favor? Nays?
nay.
1 nay. So the motion passes, 7 yays, 1 nay. All right. So, let's go ahead and go to B3, slide 10, please. Right, well, let's do this one real quick. Is there anyone willing to put a motion out on the floor on B3?
I move that our committee
make a request of the FVA staff that in documents provided to us analyzing the grant applications, that they don't use red, yellow, and green as highlighted colors for Excel spreadsheets for administrative notes, and that instead they use blue.
I will second.
All right, so Mr. Jeffries put a motion out there that not to use the colors red, yellow, green, and red, but instead only use the color blue. And that is seconded by Mr. Archer. All in favor? We have 1, 2, 3, 4 in favor. All not in favor? And we have 3. Mr. O'Reilly, which way did you vote, sir?
I was in favor.
You were in favor, okay, so that, I changed my count, that was 5, and 3 nays, so the motion passes. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and go on a break for about 15 minutes. The standard timepiece will be the clock on the wall, so we'll reconvene. How about we go to 12:15, but I want to make sure that everyone understands that this is a public meeting and there may not be sidebars out there discussing what we've chatted about here and what will go on further. So with that said, we'll break for 20 minutes and we'll reconvene at 12:15. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead and reconvene the committee meeting, please. Mr. Hatfield?
Yeah, like
Mr. Hatfield?
27%.
I thought they had a cap on that.
So before Mr. Hatfield continues with, we'll go on to the third of 5 recommendations. I would like to recognize Mr. Chip Osborne, the Director of Resource Management. Thank you very much, sir, for attending this meeting. We certainly appreciate your time. So the other thing I'd like to bring up, please, is if we could make sure our cell phones are on silent or buzz or mute or something like that, please, so that we can give due attention. All right, Mr. Hatfield, so we've taken care of, voted on 2 recommendations, and if you would, sir, now bring up the 3rd recommendation along with what slide, please, sir?
Okay, on the page 10, the B3, what we were thinking there, just to eliminate the red flags.
Well, sir, correct me if I'm wrong, we did vote on that
We
one.
did too.
Yeah.
Okay, well, if you vote back.
Right, so I stand corrected, I did say 3rd, I kind of thought that one was, anyway, my mistake, sir. So if you go on to the next recommendation.
Page 12. And this is the recommendation, Texas Veterans Commission Regions. We've looked at the demographics, the maps and so forth, and there's 2 or 3 things that we talked about. And one of them is the fact that we try to move these monies out as fairly and equitable as we can, but we don't have the same number of veterans in each region. North Texas probably has around 24%, and last year, like I said earlier, they got around 12, I think it's 14% of the money. They had 24% of the veterans. And what we're looking for, and then also the cost, they vary so much. Housing, well, that's another issue in itself, and the fact that the housing, that gets some houses fixed in Houston, it's heavy dollars. You know, it can be up to $12,000, $13,000 a piece, whereas it may not cost as much in other areas. So that's one of the things that we thought about, and also the critical needs in each area. They don't, all the regions have the same critical needs. And so what we're wanting here is just that we be able to make grant considerations to be more in proportion to where the veterans, to where they live within the regions, the variable cost in regions, and critical needs in regions. In other words, what we're saying, it's up to us to make a decision. And we just say we want to be part of it, rather than just put it in numerical orders as it is. And we would consider all of this as part of the decision-making process. And so that's what we're looking for, is just that we should be able to consider these grants to be able to consider these issues. And we're not putting them in numeric or anything. We just believe that these are the considerations that should be made.
So my question is, what's the gold standard to arrive at those numbers? Is it a census? Is it BAH rates? That's what I'm concerned about, is the gold standard. So I don't want to say Region 5, you get $1 million when I have no earthly idea how that all is arrived at.
Well, first of all, this is, of course, somewhat political. I'll say that, because we all have different thoughts and opinions, and what we're trying to do is, that very first one I said, be more balanced, equitable and balanced. And that's all we're trying to do, I believe, with this statement. And
Well,
I guess,
is there a law or something in there, Mr. Cato, that says, all right, absolutely each region, or is it just a charge by the commissioners that we try and make it equitable along the regions?
Our guiding legislation just says make grants to assist veterans. So no, I don't think there's nothing in there about regions. I'll read you the priority as it is in the RFA that was published for the last grant. And it says geographic distribution. FVA Advisory Committee will develop recommendations that will ensure widespread distribution of grants across the state. That's the priority given to the Advisory Committee.
So, I'd kind of like to couple off of Mr. O'Reilly on, I was looking for some sort of idea of a directive, or, hey, guys, let's this amount for each region, because each region presents different categories that they're really homing in on. And I know then we have your statewide correction grants. So could you help me out, Mr. Heffa?
well, the best example I can give you is last year's, where the North Texas has approximately 24%, and then we awarded 14% in total money grants. And we looked at that and said, it seemed like that should be a little bit more fairly divided up, or balanced. Now, we're not even considering saying, let's go into demographics and say, okay, they've got 24%, they get 24% of the money. We're not even considering that. And we may have a region like South Texas, which in reality, where they have more critical needs, and we may need to give them more money because of the critical needs.
So let me direct a question to Mr. Cato. So if organization X that's out in East Texas hasn't used all their money for, say it's a mental health issue, but someone in the west part of the state, there's more money that's needed for mental health as through applications and that. As the year goes by, do you have that ability to shift those funds?
No. What happens with a grant, at the end of the grant term, if there's money that is unexpended, that money just gets deobligated, rolls back into the Fund for Veterans Assistances, and is available for the next grant cycle. We don't move money back and forth between grantees in the middle of the cycle.
I don't know, gentlemen. It would seem to me if we could have maybe restated a recommendation, maybe, that we have the ability to move funds if one pot gets less, so that we serve all the veterans within the state. Yes, Mr. Wright.
I think herein lies the problem. I think we all want to be as fair, a rather vague term, as possible. It's what we've seen is a pattern. Part of it is just to create more awareness. I do believe, and I'm not 100% certain what the commissioners mean when they make geographic widespread distribution a priority. And I'm obviously a little biased, living up in Region 8, seeing a lot of need. Not that there isn't need everywhere. I mean, we don't have enough money, and this committee can't solve that problem. We can just do the best job we can with the money that we have. So we know what we'd like to have in a perfect world. So the recommendation is more of in a perfect world, we distribute the money a little more balanced.
Well, certainly I'm okay with that, but I'd just like to have the flexibility, or Charlie have the flexibility and his colleagues to then, if a pot runs dry on East Texas at a certain point in time in the year, kind of like the federal government does, it becomes whoever puts in their requests, end of year purchases, for example, and it's then comes out of the general pot.
Sure.
Yes, Mr. Cervantes. I do see Mr. Jeffers.
I think that the commission did give us that guidance, that flexibility, with leaving that so broad. It's up to us. It's up to your individual votes. I don't think we need to mess with that.
Mr. Jeffries, I see you, Mr. O'Reilly.
I just think, I think on the reprioritization issue, that would make it really difficult on the staff, because these are individual applications. It's not like a bucket of water that, the thing equalizes. So if you, and one of the places that a organization that doesn't expend all its funds is reflected is in the application scoring. There is a component of that said whether they use their funds right. I think that's correct. But if you can't take money away from one group and give it to another that didn't request it, because they've had to rewrite that they'd have to rewrite their application midstream, I think. So that would just be really difficult. I think returning that money is good, unless we change like the whole process back to the law, I think.
I'd just like to recognize Mr. Palladino, the Executive Director, walking in. Thank you very much, sir, for stopping by. Do you have any comments, sir?
Richard, I'm sorry. I just want to say hi. Did you already eat lunch?
20-minute lunch, sir.
Did you get enough to eat? No. They have a. Well, anyway, thank you for recognizing me. Thank you for all being here. You got everybody?
Yeah, just one, sir.
Wow, that's great. Well, I appreciate you coming here. And so you're reviewing the procedures and coming up with some recommendations for the commission?
Yes.
That's great. I appreciate that. And I think they're going to have an advisory, they're going to have a commission meeting in September to review the recommendations and, look at making some rules for that's least on the separate category for county vendor service officers, right? So I appreciate what you're doing here. And so you getting a lot done?
Yes, sir. We've had quite a few chats.
Well, that's good. So we appreciate you coming up with recommendations, and then, we'll, and if you're going to go to the commission meeting, then we can present the recommendation to the commissioners, and then they'll, look at that. Charlie will be there with a bunch of other recommendations. But I know one thing we're going to do is the rules for the new category for the county vendor service officer grants, for direct services to veterans. And then other than that, it's more procedural stuff. Well, thank you. Anybody have any questions of me?
No, sir. Oh, wait a minute, Mr. Wright.
Sir, I was going to ask you, with the Texas Veterans Commission, Texas County Service Officers Grants, are they gonna be putting in grant requests, like this becomes a brand new category, so they need to put in grant requests? Or will they be responsible for that allocation of money?
Well, my assumption is that, according to the law, it doesn't go into those specifics, but it does say that, they will, receive, funding for direct assistance to veterans, and it's a portion out of the, I think, out of the general assistance grant. So, my recommendation would be that, they have to apply for the grant, similar to way, right now, they can apply for the grants right out of the general assistance, and some counties have, like Hidalgo County, Nueces County, I mean, they have done that, El Paso County. And so, I think that it would be very similar, so that they're applying for grants for direct service to veterans only as their own category, because I think, 5% of the money from the general assistance is being put in a category just for county veteran service, just for counties to apply. So to answer your question is that would be my recommendation to the commissioners, that they make the counties apply, because, say you have 100 counties apply, and right now you don't have that many counties apply, but say you do. Now you have to evaluate which counties have a better plan to use the money. So I think it's going to be competitive. Where maybe initially, you think only 5 counties are going to apply and it's not competitive, but I think eventually you will have a lot of counties apply, and so there has to be some sort of competition, and so therefore I think there has to be an application. Yeah. So that means if you could give some recommendations on that, where we could have a similar process that we have now, how they apply for grants with the general assistance grants, only this is a portion of funds that have been separated just for the counties. That's the difference I see. And it still says direct services to veterans. Still says that, if you look at the law. Does that answer that?
It does, it brings up a few other questions, but I think that'll get worked out.
Yeah, because if you just allocate it to the counties, but they don't have a good plan to use the money, or if more counties apply, then how do you make it competitive? So I think there has to be an application. And the same grant standards apply. If the law doesn't say the same grant standards don't apply, it still says within the fund veteran assistance. So I would think the same grant stuff, apply. Anything else? Oh, yeah. So the commissioners have to make a rule on that. So I'm going to talk to the chair about that, but the law did get passed that the advisory committees can get per diem and reimbursement for travel expenses. So as of 1 September, so it doesn't cover this month. But after that, we'll be able to do that. So it'll be, and so we'll work out the details on that, but there's a travel expenses, and per diem in there. So we'll have to look at that and make the decision on how we're going to process that, but we'll do that. But that's a good thing, I think, because you give up your time and you're volunteering to do this, and I really appreciate it. Any other questions? Charlie, thank you very much. You and your staff are doing a great job in supporting this endeavor, and thank you all for your participation and giving us great recommendations. All right, thanks. I'll hand it
Thanks,
back
Mr.
over.
Palladino.
All right, we'll see you. Thank you.
All right, so to continue our discussion, Mr. O'Reilly.
Well, back on that same point, I'm at a disadvantage in that the references that we've made here this morning or this afternoon have been, the North Texas region in 24%, and yet only receiving 14. I don't, in the context of what the other regions, in other words, East Texas get, if they had 15% of the veteran population, but 40%. I think that it seems to me that what this does is maybe raise our consciousness about making sure that we have that balance, and it's something that we could discuss throughout the process of awarding, that we be conscious of this. But I don't know that we get any direction from the commission on it any more than what we already have.
I wouldn't have a problem with it being that way myself.
as long as we are aware that when we do put these monies out, we're voting to kind of, and I've tried it myself with the regions, but I didn't do it quite so much with the demographics of the number of veterans in the regions, and also the critical needs. I mean, I can see where certain regions, I would certainly be in favor of more money in that region, even though they had fewer veterans. But, go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Wright?
I think Mr. O'Reilly brings up a great point. I've been sitting here trying to figure out how to create a motion, and I can't do it. So I think it really is just more to raise the consciousness of the group. And again, I think the next number 5 will certainly aid that, because the 10% rule is put in place. It effectively pushes more money down. And then in answer to your first question, South Texas was the only group that went over their percentage by any significant number. Everybody else came in pretty much right about where they were, which actually kind of surprised me when I crunched the numbers. But it was, I'll be biased, I'm from Dallas, I'll admit it. But I appreciated the fact that all of our committee agreed that it was, so if this is just a conscious raising, great. Unless somebody else has some comments, let's move on to number 5.
So I have 4 comments. Comment number 1, I think Charlie and his staff do a great job as we're discussing and deliberating this, that they kind of bring up where the money's going. But I also too think that we all come from different regions, and while we represent all regions, I think you should have a conscious area of what's going on in your region. Number 3, that was put out in the application, the advisory committee will develop recommendations that will ensure widespread distribution of the grants across the state. So we all have our own independent charge to ensure that, so we're conscious. The only thing I'm still passionate about, but we can move on, it's no big deal. I personally feel that if at the end of the calendar year, fiscal year, however these funds operate on, that if there are overages somewhere, that there's that ability to go back in and fund another veteran that's in need, because let's face it, then we're trying to take care of, all veterans' needs, whatever category, to assist in that. So that's all I would put out to my colleague members. Yes, Mr. Hatfield.
I would agree with you. There's one item that probably would have to be adjusted, because, and Charlie, help me out if I'm wrong here, if you have in a grant goes out and let's say they don't spend all their money, then they can get a extension, can they not?
All the applicants per the request for application have the opportunity to amend. And the amendments could be time. In other words, they could get an extension up to 6 months.
Okay.
Scope, they could serve different categories of veterans. They could provide other services, and what was the other one? Budget. Yeah, you can shift what your money is within within what you have already in your application. You can shift money from different categories. Say you didn't spend a whole lot on supplies, but you need more money in client services, so you just need to amend to move that money down there. So that's really what the options to amend can do.
Okay.
The approval authority for the amendments changes by what you ask for. Just those simple amendments like that can be approved by the executive director. If they want to add money, in other words, they want to request to have more money added to their pot, that has to be approved by the commission. They've retained that authority.
Well, I think it's a good discussion, and I think it's a discussion that Texas Veterans Commission needs to have, is if there comes the opportunity where there's excess money, if we can use it somewhere else, maybe have the authority to do that.
Yeah, right, give that to the executive director, Charlie, and them, that they have that mantra that once we've approved the funds, if there's not being used in one part of the state, then that way we're effectively helping every veteran that comes to the front door and needs help in whatever category. So I'm under the impression we should use all the funds that are granted. So I would just, yes, Mr. Wright?
Quick question, Madam Chairwoman, and to a degree to our executive director. Because the way we're doing it now, the money, any excess funds roll over to the next year, is that by law, and is that something the Texas Congress would have to change? Or is that?
Where the law applies is that all money that is in the Fund for Veterans Assistance account is not annual money. In other words, it doesn't expire, it's not recouped by GR.
Okay.
So our money rolls over every year. And so yes, if the contract is from July 1st through June 30th, the expectation to that contract is you will serve the number of veterans that you said you would serve, and that you would expend the funds doing that. That's pretty much the two performance measures that we're obligated to report to the Legislative Budget Board. There's nothing, there is no process that involves, other than the amendment process right now. If you overspend or overperform and you want more money, you have to request more money of an amendment. And that amendment for requesting more money, that approval authority resides with the commissioners. And I'd have to check to be sure that that's in the TAC. I'm not sure if that was in our TAC or not, but I know it's on the amendment form.
So legally, it would sound like the commissioners have got the authority to do that within the year. And that was my only question.
Okay, then I think we've taken care of that. I don't think there's any motion or anything. I think we've had an awareness discussion, heightened awareness, and so with that said, if there's any further discussion, if not, I'd like to move on to the last recommendation, Mr. Hatfield.
Okay, let's go to page 18. And this is our recommendation. If you remember, I used the example of $2 million, and since there aren't any restrictions on the other three categories, then if somebody put in a request for $500,000, then that's 25% of the money. And I'll tell you right up front, all these numbers are arbitrary, but they're just a starting point, and you need to have it somewhere. I think it's much better to have more individuals receive the money in a category than to have one or two applicants receiving most of the money. So, and basically what we did was kind of use the same strategy that the Texas Veterans Commission did, and they went to 10% for all 7 regions. So we said 10% of the 300,000, that would be the max, and then each applicant 6% would be 180,000. And it's just more or less going by their guidelines with the general assistance grants, except instead of using the $5 million, we use $3 million. Now, there's one other correction here, and, I don't have it. We moved this, instead of the $5 million, we moved that to $4.5 million, above $4.5 million, and that's not even on this sheet. It's on, we did was, there's two, there is, okay. The reason for this is just a matter of, when it gets below 5, we really want all of them to be over $5 million. It's just a matter of that we want them to, the money to be spread around to different regions and so forth. That's it. And I'll tell you up front, it's arbitrary, but it's a good compromise, I think.
Well, based on what we just talked about on the last recommendation, it would seem to me the application is the same thing on this, that it's a heightened awareness, because it seems like the two go together with me. It just becomes a heightened awareness, and I do think that, correct me if I'm wrong, on this last round, there were organizations that asked for X amount, and we gave them less. And correct me if I'm wrong.
No, that was 2 rounds ago.
2 rounds ago, Mr. Cato?
We had one organization in this last cycle that was not fully awarded, and
thought so.
that was it, just one. out of 91 grants.
Because I only remember one from the time before, too. Okay, sorry. I thought we fully funded everybody, but maybe not. Obviously, not. You would know better than I would.
It wasn't, they were not fully funded. Your recommendation was not a full funded, not because of money availability, but because of circumstances with their application and their finances. And I can tell you, I can show you that offline if you'd like.
Take your word for it.
Yes,
Madam
Mr.
Chair,
Hatfield.
go over what you just said, we'll make sure I understand it. Because the way I'm understanding this, these other three categories, the mental health and the treatment court and the houses for Texas Heroes, the present philosophy, or the principle is they could ask for $500,000. And what we're suggesting is if you have less than $5 million, then the most you could ask for would be $300,000. So that's already pretty well set in stone. I mean, that's just the way it is right now.
Well, my whole thought was we don't have to give them the full amount, correct, Mr. Cato? If they ask for $500,000, we can say no, $400,000 to this organization and maybe fully fund another one, but we move that money to another organization that may fit within the realm of that dollar amount. Am I tracking correct or no?
You have a priority from the commission that says fully fund where possible.
Okay. Where possible.
Make sure I get the right language here. Hang on, let me put it back up. The FVA Advisory Committee will recommend fully funding grant requests whenever possible.
Whenever possible.
And I can go into details into the one. We had one organization that requested well over what their finances supported for a grant. Instead of not awarding them, you chose to award them less, but still give them a grant, and it was numbers that seemed to be appropriate to what their finances reflected they could handle.
That's the way you want. Yes, Mr. Wright.
Madam Chairwoman, to continue that discussion, we do have that authority. Part of the reason for the modification, a lot of grants, we do things differently than other grant providers. And so a lot of organizations, for example, I'll pick on Dallas again, because when I saw their grant request, I knew Denton County was going to get knocked out. We had $1.5 million for veteran treatment court, and they asked for $400,000. And the second I landed, I couldn't say anything to them. I was just like, and I knew, and nobody voted for them because just logically, you can't gobble up all the money. But effectively, to force them to ask for an amount of money that we realistically could give when we were under $5 million. And that was the logic behind all of these slides, was to back that off so that we can continue the charge from the TVC to fully fund grants, as opposed to just saying no.
I'm that kind of maverick that, hey, whenever possible, but,
Being through a few rounds of this, it becomes a very difficult decision. We start cutting grants, and I don't know what it does to their budgets or to their applications. Does it do anything there, Charlie?
The reason that the priority exists is that we try to avoid the gamesmanship of I'm going to ask for $500,000 knowing I'm going to get $200,000, and then going through all of the churn and the labor required on the part of the organization and the part on the staff. If you start partially funding things, you're right, then everything has to be adjusted, the budgets all have to be adjusted and all that. I think that the priority exists so that we're going to be straight up. Ask for what you need, and we'll give you what you guys will recommend. The commission will give them what they need, and move on from there.
First of all, we'd like for each category to have $5 million. Then we don't have to worry about this. But if you have something in place to take care of it when it gets below there, then it's already taken care of. We don't have to worry about it. I'm not sure I want to go down that road of parceling out grants myself because of the Texas Veterans Commission's goals or priorities. So I would probably not be in favor. I mean, I'm in favor of moving this to halfway in between.
And Madam Chairwoman,
Yes,
the
Mr.
other
Wright?
point, and I referenced it when we were a few slides back, this does tie into, as we were putting a priority, commissioners put the priority on an outstanding grant. It effectively ties our hand to limit somebody. So when we look at, which one of the priorities do we want to violate? And we're trying to violate none of them. So we're trying to create a scenario where we could satisfy all of them.
I hear what you're saying, and then that's why we went with the vote of earlier satisfactory and above. And then we went through the process of them being cognizant of the whole state. But then how do you decide, well, how do you know, since Dallas seems to keep coming up, that really the greatest need in Dallas is mental health? It's not really housing. I don't know. In my area, Bexar County, San Antonio and that, the greatest need may be general assistance. So that's what I'm trying to say, that by just giving that area that's it, this is it. Yes, I don't want to get into gamesmanship. You're absolutely correct. No way. So this, essentially, by giving, so much, that's it, that they can ask for, I got it, that stops gamesmanship. They either get it or not. And we have the ability whenever possible. So we know, as a committee, what really the leeways and legally we can distribute out. That's all I'll say to us, that I think sometimes when we come to the plate here, to the desk, that really we have a little more flexibility than we realize now that you gentlemen have gone through this very lengthy process to open our eyes, and me, I'll start with me first, opening my eyes, said, well, wait a minute, we actually have more leverage here than I actually thought. That's all I'll say. That's my thoughts. Yes? No? And maybe some of these meetings will wind up being longer, but at the end of the day, if we get more veterans help, then I'm all for it. I'm on it.
Well, could we do this? Could we kind of check and see the intent of this? Do you agree with the intent or not? And maybe you don't agree with the intent. And the intent is just basically to spread the money out a little bit more and so forth.
Say that again?
Well, the intent of this, when you have less than 5 million, if one organization received 25% of the money, you could have 4 organizations take all the money, and you may have a request, maybe 20 applications.
Go ahead, Mr. Poteet.
I agree with Madam Chair. I think you're handcuffing yourself, because we have made those decisions in the past where we haven't fully funded, but the priority that we were told came from on high from the commission was that we should try and do that. Fund as much as we can out in different regions. And a lot of these folks, it's pretty clear based on my experience, they're asking for as much as they can get, hoping they'll get as much as they can get. I just don't know why we'd handcuff ourselves when we've proven over and over again that we'll make a recommendation that says 500,000 is too much for this program, and then we spread the money around to some of the more other-worthy organizations. So I don't understand why we don't just emphasize, as I think Madam Chair did, that this is important, we need to be sensitive to it, and we need to try and make it a priority. But by setting arbitrary numbers, you're handcuffing yourself to make a judgment. Because what if they are the best? And then you're passing money around, not necessarily to an organization, or you may have money left over. But that ought to be the judgment call of this group, I would think. That's just my opinion.
Well, I may have used the wrong word, arbitrary. but I think it has some basis to it because it's halfway between 1 million and 5 million. And that's how this got started that way. But in reality then, you're basically saying the same thing about the Texas Veterans Commission because the 500,000 is arbitrary. The 300,000 is arbitrary if we're going to go by those definitions. And all they're trying to do is, that I believe, the Texas veterans, they want to hand out the money in a balanced and equitable way, and we're just trying to help them do that. That's all. It's the same reason, you know, this, I forgot, when we had 17 million in general assistance last year, or was it 14, what was it last year?
9.2 million,
Yeah.
I think, 17.4 million overall.
Yeah. They set some guidelines, and then basically all this does is use their guidelines below $5 million. That's how I look at it.
Well, I think thoughtfully we came together as a committee on this last round and saw an organization that was continually asking for 500,000, and when we thoughtfully deliberated it out, in a category, that organization was not even considered, and I believe that one happened to be in the higher, I don't want to come out and say outstanding when it might have been commendable, but I think we thoughtfully looked at that as a whole committee and moved on to other organizations. So I would just submit that to my fellow committee members. Mr. O'Reilly, I didn't know if you were wanting to jump in there, sir?
Well, we're talking about where we have grants below 5 million, 4.5 million and below. And I think that that is appropriate, your recommendation to have a separate criteria here. And where the premise is that we have a limited amount of dollars available. And so therefore we should give it the greatest spread that we can. And so I support this idea in that we would then go out to the field and say that the maximum for this category is 300,000, and hopefully we could spread that appropriately and fully fund at 300,000.
Well, keep in mind, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I'll say, keep in mind, this would only apply if the grant money is below 5 million. So, and actually, we don't even want this to ever happen.
Maybe you move.
You know, even in that spirit, hey, 300,000, I mean, then that allows for satisfactory and above to, provided after thoughtful deliberation, that, yeah, then there would be a couple more organizations that would probably be fully funded. And I think that certainly allows for that. I certainly see that as a compromise. Mr. Cervantes, sir?
I have nothing to add.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So, is there any further discussion now to just, now word a motion, craft a motion, craft.
Oh, dear, caught me on that one. Does somebody want to craft a motion?
Pondering,
Sir?
I'm not quite sure
Oh.
how to word this.
So maybe we should talk about that, maybe we just cap the amount that an organization can ask for is up to the upper limit of 300,000? Yes, Mr. Wright?
I'm sorry. I'm struggling with the idea of wording the actual motion. I think it'd be nice to have more feedback. We probably should have asked the director when he was here, his thoughts, but I don't know if we should pose it as a percentage, as a number or if the motion should be as vague as motion the recommendation that grants requests should be percentage-wise more in line with total grant money available. I know that's so vague, I don't think it makes any sense.
Mr. Cato, do you have any guidance or thoughts? Just thoughts.
I understand the concept that you're looking at, and I will tell you that the last workshop in 2015 that we did with the commissioners, the staff recommended a maximum grant amount in general assistance of $300,000 and only $500,000 if you were a statewide program. And it was as simple as that. So that general assistance grant right now is set up that way. You can only get $300,000 for a general assistance if you're regional or super regional, whatever, or a single county. You have to be a statewide program to get the maximum amount of $500,000.
Yes, Mr. Jeffers?
So I don't want to step back from any of the committee work. Understanding that in the general category, does that apply to any of the other categories? I think it doesn't.
No, it does not.
And so could the motion be that we would just impose the same limits on all the categories as we do on the general assistance? Because I think that's the real issue, is that you can have a small program in the mental health grant, for instance, but you can apply for $500,000, where if you were applying for that same program in the general assistance category, you could only apply for $300,000. Is that?
I will give you
Is that true?
I'll give you an impact of that. There will never be a statewide VTC grant.
Yes, yeah.
But a vet court could conceivably apply for $500,000 right now.
Currently.
And so,
Won't the grant request 400,000?
No.
They can request $400,000 in Veterans Mental Health, Veterans Treatment Court, and Housing for Texas Heroes.
so could a motion be that we align all the max amounts for each category with the general assistance process?
My point with that is you will never have a $500,000 grant in VTC. The other portion of it is Housing for Texas Heroes. While we do have some statewide, there are very few that are statewide there as well.
Yes, Mr. Hatfield.
I have a suggestion. What we could do is just say if the money is below $500,000, the maximum grant is $300,000.
And I think that's basically what
I think that's
Jeffries is saying.
right. So let me backtrack a little bit here. On these statewide grants, do those guys even use all their money? I mean, seriously, because I know a veteran came and I put it up to you, and I'm like, well, fine, then I guess maybe the statewide grant will be the catch-all net. But I'm wondering if they really are a catch-all net, and are they using them all?
I'm afraid I'm not prepared to answer the question as to what our expenditure percentages are on the statewide grants. We can get that. Irv, is there any way you can get that fairly quickly?
Okay,
Yeah,
but I just put that out there.
Now, the performance-wise, trying to get performance, up to the speed performance of what they did. We look at expenditures at the end. I know our last reconciliation, there was still about $7 million of the $17 million that hadn't been spent for the cycle that just ended June 30th. But I'm talking April now. That's how far behind we are with our computer system. So I don't know that I can even make the statement that statewide historically spends more than regionals or not. I can't make that. I don't have that data right now. I'm sorry.
So then, how much historically are we putting back that's not being used in total? back into the fund?
It varies year by year. It really does.
Statistically, what's an average?
I would say less than 5 million. But that again is how those organizations perform.
But gentlemen, that's what bothers me. That's my point. We could be, if we had that flexibility, or the commission gives us that flexibility, or gives them the flexibility, that when one pot runs out, that the performance measures, we can serve more veterans, or on the front outset, we can grant more money to deserving organizations, which falls in line with what you're saying. And how we get to that point, except maybe what I see you, Mr. Wright, what Mr. Jeffrey said, that maybe that cap shouldn't be so high. Maybe, I mean, it should be lowered, that's what I meant, rephrase there. The 300,000. If we have statistical averages that show that, then, yes, Mr. Wright.
And my suggestion to you, just, it is a separate point, we actually have two more motions. One that I've tried to craft, so bear with me. But then a second motion to deal with the separate issue of, as the year goes on, and effectively more money has become available in that year, we create a process by which, as opposed to it rolling over to the next year, to address the issue you're bringing up, so we make more of that money available immediately to other grantees.
You mean like we,
No, go ahead, Mr. Cervantes, please.
like we do a wait list?
If I understand, and this is, I'm paraphrasing what I'm hearing from Ms. Reina, yes. I don't know how you envision the decision being made on who would get that money.
So, let me answer, please, and then I'll recognize you. So, say Organization X on general assistance now has two more veterans come up, and it becomes a dollar amount of, I don't know, $3,000, that the executive director can approve that Organization 99 over here hasn't used all their funds by a certain point, and that the money is shifted.
Would you like me to address it?
Sure.
I will tell you, you're more than welcome to suggest that, but historically, the commission is unwilling to give money decisions to delegate those. So that's why our amendment process is what it is. If a organization would like to add to their pot, they have to ask the commission for it. The commission only meets 4 times a year. So there really is, I don't want to say it's not possible, but there's no process right now to be able to do that. And if you look historically at the amount of money that FVA has been able to grant, it kind of operates like a stair step. Before the cycle had just ended, so the 2015-2016 cycle, we had $21 million that was awarded between all the different grants. We forecast way out in advance. We look at what the expenditures are, what's going to come back, what we're going to get from the lottery, what we're going to get from all the other things. And this past cycle, we went down from 21 million something to 17.4 million. Again, we did that same process of what does it look like coming back, what does it look like the revenues are going to be, what are the donations, and that's why this cycle that we're publishing the RFAs at the end of this month for is 26 million. So it does a little bit like that. We work so far out in advance. So that money will get out there to serve veterans.
And thank you for that very exciting news.
Right, yep. So that's a little bit of how the sausage is made when it comes to the money amount and where it is.
Yes, Mr. Hatfield.
Madam Chair, I think I could see somewhat of a compromise. And those other three areas, the other three areas mainly, just have 300,000, whether it's statewide or in one region, just to have 300,000. Because there's also another issue we haven't talked about, and let's say the housing for the Texas Heroes. Housing is expensive, and so it's going to take money to do it. So that's why I'm thinking now, with hearing you all discuss it, I'd be in favor of saying if it's below 5 million, then 300,000.
Yeah, and I think if we lower that threshold, how many applications do we have? Over 100 and some odd
We had
applicants?
188 last time.
And then we wound up funding how many?
91.
Okay, so there you go, gentlemen. There's the math. We're into the math now. 50% got it. If we lower the thresholds, then more applications are going to get funded. Yes, Mr. Wright.
Okay, we've talked about two different issues. To sum up this issue, I'd like to make a motion to the, what we'll call 10% issue, but I'm not going to use it in the motion, that we recommend to the commissioners that we align all grant categories with the maximum rules for funding with the general assistance grant rules, which would be your $300,000 max.
Is there any discussion? Yes, Mr. Poteet.
Just a quick question. It just seems like this is a solution looking for a problem. I didn't know this was a big issue, and we still have the flexibility to do this, but if you start putting handcuffs on us, you do tend to take that flexibility away. So I'm not exactly sure why this is an issue. It seems like it's part B of the first motion that was approved, and it seems like it's all geared and targeted to spreading the money around more. And that's just the only observation I want to make. I didn't know that this was a big issue, and just by putting more handcuffs and prohibitions on this group, I think it makes it much more difficult. And I know we have, and I've done it repeatedly on my scorecards. You can look at them. When somebody asks for way too much money, I cut them down, notwithstanding the recommendation and priorities. All I'm trying to say is, it just seems to me we shouldn't handcuff ourselves just because one of the categories is smaller. The threshold is smaller for whatever reason.
Okay, so thank you, Mr. Poteet. Let me go back to Mr. Wright. Did you put a motion out on the floor, or were you discussing
I actually made a motion.
Okay, then we have to vote on the motion first. So,
If we need
right.
discussion, I can turn that very rapidly.
Well, no, we have to go through the procedures of it. Is there, so sir, Mr. Wright, if you would restate the motion again, please.
That we recommend to the Texas Veterans Commissioners to align all grant categories with the maximum rules for funding with the, as stated in the general assistant grant category.
All right, is there a second to that motion? All right, Mr. Hatfield has seconded the motion. All in favor? Raise your hand. All right, we have 4 in favor. All not in favor? We have a tie.
Doesn't pass.
Doesn't pass.
Yeah.
A vote has to be proactive. In other words, it has to have a majority.
I'm
of that.
trying to think of what Robert's rules say on a tie.
Sure, that's the rule.
Okay, so the motion died. All right. So,
Madam Chair, may I say one thing?
yes, Mr.
I'll
Hatfield.
tell you what, I certainly appreciate the discussion we've had today. I think there were some things that were put on the table that are very good, and I appreciate every one of you participating. So thank you all very much. We're through, are we?
Well, I just want to make sure there's no further discussion or another motion or crafted motion to go from there. All right, so if not, we have a couple of items that will go to recommendations that will go to the TVC. And that's the first one is the recommended best practices. So that will be discussed, and that motion passed on on the first three, an executive summary, consider having one person make the presentation and express why your organization is different. So that was the first one on the best practices. The second one was remove the total, outstanding committee, commendable in that, and it's just, there are gonna be two cut lines, satisfactory and then below average. What did I mess up on?
My understanding is that you were recommending changing the priority
Right,
to say not outstanding, but
To
satisfactory
satisfactory.
and above, but not eliminating the satisfactory scoring.
Do you want me
Right.
to read it again as I wrote it?
And that's what I had in my notes.
right, we're removing outstanding in that, and it's just satisfactory and above, and then below average line, that's the cut line. Am I correct?
Yes.
All right. And then the third one was to the administrative use of the blue flags and not the red. Am I correct? Then the other two two recommendations, we have not been approved, so we're only going to talk about three.
Can I take another shot here before we finish? That I'd like to go back to that last discussion here, and maybe rephrase and maybe make a motion. That in this recommendation, in that I don't perceive it as being a handcuff, but rather I think it opens it up in this category. I mean, the category of where the grant money available is below 4.5 million, that we apply the 10% rule. Or we apply, maybe another way of saying it, we apply the maximum of 300,000 as a maximum grant per applicant. And so I'd like to make a motion that we recommend that when the total grant is below 4.5 million, that we adopt a $300,000 maximum for applicants.
Okay, so recommend that when the total grant is below 4.5 million, and that means all categories, correct? Or just that one category?
No, all categories.
All right,
I think that's a rare issue, and maybe this will never happen again, but in the event where it's 4.5 million or less.
then the $300,000 cap applies, correct?
Correct.
All right, is there a second to that motion?
I'd like to second it.
All right, it is now seconded by Mr. Archer. All in favor?
That's a question.
Well, sir, we have a motion out, please. All right, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 yays are in favor, and the nays? And we have 3 nays, the motion carries. All right, so then that makes our fourth recommended motion that if a total grant is below the $4.5 million threshold, then the $300,000 cap applies. Am I correct, gentlemen? Okay, so we're bringing 4 recommendations to the Texas Veterans Committee in September. Yes, Mr. Hatfield.
It's a clarification. I assume it's all 4 categories.
And that's what I asked, yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'm trying to adhere to Robert's rules there, sir. Okay. Again, my My sincere thanks to Mr. Hatfield for heading up this subcommittee, Mr. Archer, Mr. Perry's, and Jeffries, and Mr. Wright. Certainly a heck of a lot of time, and your passion and commitment, and the number of hours. Nine teleconferences is one meeting, that adds up to a lot of hours. And then when you put together this whole slide deck, I would ask that you don't take anything personally of what we've all discussed, because at the end of the day, we're trying to make the veteran the winner. And that's what we did here wholeheartedly. And I appreciate that, and that we've had a frank discussion and been respectful to each other's opinions and our views. But at the end, I know the veteran is in your heart and mine too, and our passions. So with that said, our next agenda item is number 10, which has to do with our next meeting, and I would like ask Mr. Cato to tell us about the next grant series coming up, sir.
Thank you very much. Okay, just a couple of information things. The request for applications for the 2018-2019 grants will be published on August 21st, and the application will be available at that time. The general assistance grants will be due, the applications will be due October 26th. And then the other 3 grant program applications will be due the following Thursday, November 2nd.
Could you say that last line again, please?
The other 3, the general assistance is due October 26th, mental health,
Thank you.
treatment court, and housing for Texas Heroes will be due on November 2nd. We staggered the dates so that we're just not completely swamped by those all at one time and give folks a chance.
Is it possible that there will be a RFA that includes these county veteran service officers this year, or is that gonna go next year?
That'll be next year. We still have to, as Mr. Palladino said, we still gotta go through the rulemaking process, and we have to get the commissioners' ideas of what they're gonna do, and that's gonna be discussed at what I'm talking about at the next item. We do need one committee member to be present at the September 18th FVA workshop with the commissioners in Galveston at our annual TVC fall conference. They called for a specific meeting to discuss, and one of those agenda items is your recommendations. So we need somebody to be there for that one. And then they've asked us to come up as a staff with some recommendations as well. So it's just process type stuff. So the next thing would be September 18th, somebody from the committee to present this to them. Then the next regular quarterly commission meeting will be here in Austin on November 8th. I think I told you November 2 before, but
Yeah,
it's November.
I
just realized, no, it's not. It's
All right,
November 8th.
So, if I could step in
Sure.
there right now, Mr. Cato, because I do know you have some other things. So let's talk about September 18th. Let me give you my thoughts. I do feel that like it should be one of the subcommittee members, because you were within those 10 meetings, and there may be more subjective questions asked by the TVC, and so I would recommend that one of these subcommittee members, I don't know who would raise their hand.
I don't, if somebody else wants to be there, that's perfectly fine. However, I do have to be at the TVC conference at least part-time to give a class to some other people. So I can do it if I need to. I'll just go one day early.
I second that.
Okay.
Is there anyone else on the
I don't want to
committee
take
that
anybody's
feels,
Galveston trip.
Okay,
I can probably make it, if somebody else can.
okay, so primary would be, if it's okay with the committee, Mr. Jeffries or Mr. Hatfield will be there, because I know you headed this committee, sir, subcommittee, so
That's fine. I mean, you're all welcome. I just
Right.
want to make sure we've got somebody who's planning on it. It'll be in the morning on the Monday, the 18th.
Yeah, and so according to my calendar, I can't remember if I'm flying home from Newport, Rhode Island on the 17th or the 18th, but if not, the husband's down there, but I would definitely implore one of you two gentlemen to, because of the already previously stated, so if I'm already home, I'll be down there in Galveston myself, okay? All right, then, the meeting on the 8th of November, I can definitely handle that, I'm good, but certainly any of my other colleagues that would like to come, please, moral support and support is always, because, you know, we did talk about a lot here, and sometimes another fellow members' insight is, especially with what we've debated about today, is certainly requested. All right? Okay, I think from there I interrupted Mr. Cato, and I thank you. So, sir?
Okay, with those deadlines that I gave you on the applications, we have to see all that. We anticipate the same timeline with the next cycle, and we should be able to start funneling application packages to you after the holidays, the first part of January. We anticipate, you know, as many or more applications this next time around. So we've tentatively scheduled January 29th and 30th. That's a Monday and a Tuesday. We discussed this before as the application presentation meeting days.
Okay.
And that really, as always, like this meeting, for example, if the chair decides there's a need for a meeting, they can call a meeting, and we stand by support to put it all together.
Anything else, sir?
That's all I have, other than to say thank you very much.
All right, now I'd like to go ahead and call on each committee member for any closing comments, starting with Mr. O'Reilly, sir.
I just wanted to add to the chair's comments regarding the subcommittee. I think you did an extraordinary job. I'm in awe of the work that you, and the hours that you put in, and we'll all be better served by it, so we appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Riley. Mr. Cervantes.
Yes, thank you to the subcommittee for your hard work. And I just want to say, just because I didn't vote for something, it's just because I just didn't see the evidence presented today. But as we talk more, work through them, I'm sure we'll get some clarity. And thank you, Mr. Cato.
Mr. Hatfield.
I think I've said enough.
All right, sir. Mr. Wright.
I'm close to dittoing that, but I do want to thank Mr. Cervantes for helping set up our meeting down at the VA Center in Waco. Our first meeting was incredibly informative. Doesn't have a lot to do with what we do directly. They're not obviously going to be a grant requester, but just really eye-opening. They're doing a terrific job despite some of the press, and if you get a chance, I highly recommend heading down there. And then just my thanks to the committee for everything that we're doing.
Thank you. Mr. Poteet. No comment?
Thank you.
Mr. Archer.
Honor to be here. Thank you very much.
All right, Mr. Jeffries.
Same thing, I thank everybody. I know it's hard work and everybody's got heartfelt goals here, but I think that we all want to have the need of the veteran held uppermost, and having watched this go over a couple of years from some of the chaos in the early days to this respectful process now. I thank everybody here and thank the staff, especially Charlie's staff, for their extreme patience with this process and us.
Thank you, Mr. Jeffries. And again, my colleagues here, I thank you. I thank you again for the subcommittee. And Charlie's staff, many hours. I know it, and boy, you're getting, I think you just did the move?
No, we will move in October.
Oh, nice. So you're moving, and then you get all these applications in. Wow. That's a wow moment. I thank you. It will certainly put some stressors on you with moving in that, but I do appreciate it, and I just don't say it to say it. It's tough, and then sitting here today and listening to our deliberations and probably wondering in your mind, oh no, what does this mean to me now behind my desk and computer? I got it, I understand it. Maybe I don't understand it, but I thank you. So I want to let you know that. Otherwise, let's see, September, so that'll be the Labor Day holiday. Yep, and then we've got Halloween, and then we got Thanksgiving and Christmas. So if we don't meet again, except for my colleagues that I'll see in Galveston. Oh, one other thing. So the Texas legislature did pass that there will be per diem in that and travel reimbursed in that, and I'm sure Charlie will get with us or on the mechanisms of all of that. And so that will be a nice thing. And so we'll get back with you on those mechanisms after the 1st of September. Okay? And then we'll put out the per diem and all that for Austin, and then your ability to get a government rate, which will be nice. And I know a lot of them around here do that, the hotels. All right. With that said, if there are no other comments, is there a motion?
So moved.
So moved for what?
Dismiss.
Okay, all right, there's a motion out there by Mr. Wright to adjourn. Is there a second? All right, Mr. Hatfield. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? All right, it passes 8-0. Thank you very much.
Semper Fi.
I thought a chairperson could make a motion.